Hello, and welcome to this clean historical Western romance by Martha Gillcrest. It's great to have you with us. Before we begin, be sure to hit the subscribe button, give this audiobook a thumbs up, and share it with friends. Supporting us in this simple way allows us to share more heartwarming romance stories with you for free. Now, get cozy, relax, and escape into adventure and love with a host of new characters. Enjoy. The following book is the copyright of Martha Gillcrest. The Widowed Bride's Wish by Martha Gillcrest. Chapter 1. Waterbury, Connecticut, 1886. Happy St. David's Day. Carrie Jones ladled a hearty portion of stew into Morgan's bowl, and their kitchen filled with a mouth-watering, meaty aroma that made the small dog in front of the range jump up and wag her tail. "You know how to make a hungry husband very happy," Morgan replied with a grin. He put his arm around Carrie's waist and pulled her closer until she dropped a kiss on the top of his head. "Don't forget me, Ma." Davy wriggled with anticipation, perched on the cushion on his chair. He eyed the freshly baked bread rolls and wedges of cheese that were on a plate in the middle of the table between them. "Can I give Bella a crust of bread at the end?" The dog sat politely, hearing her name, and looked at Davy with such devotion that Carrie chuckled and gave a small nod of agreement. Morgan raised his cup of water and glanced at the sampler hanging over their fireplace that his mother had stitched not long after they had arrived in America. "Here's to our forefathers and all their hard work that brought us here, all the way from Wales." He sipped his water, then as soon as Carrie had sat down, the three of them linked hands. "Bless this food, Lord. We give thanks for the bounty you bring to our table, for the roof over our heads, and for the many blessings of family and good friends we enjoy. In your name, amen." Carrie left her hand in Morgan's for a moment longer and squeezed it, catching his eye and smiling. "You look tired. I know you were glad to get the extra hours at the factory, but I hope they're not working you too hard, Morgan. Tell me about the olden days again, Pa." Davy dunked a piece of bread into his stew and gobbled it down, licking the gravy from his fingers so that nothing was missed. "Well, St. David is the patron saint of Wales, and we like to remember this date because it's where your grandparents came from, on my side of the family and your ma's. They came all the way to America on a ship from a place called Liverpool, with nothing more than the clothes on their backs and a couple of carpet bags between them." Davy's eyes rounded. "And then what happened, Pa? Were they friends? Did they live in the same house?" Carrie nodded, picking up the story of their family. "My parents and your Pa's parents came from the same valley back in the old country, and the men went straight to work in the brass rolling factory. They were desperate to earn money as soon as they could. We all lived in a ramshackle old tenement building down near the river. Times were hard." Morgan's eyes clouded, and he paused, wondering whether he should go on. Carrie grasped his hand again, and they exchanged a look of understanding. "When your Pa and I were still a lot younger, well before we were married, we had a terrible winter one year." She shivered at the memory of the way the icy wind and snow had found their way through every nook and cranny of their tenement building, freezing everything in its path. If she closed her eyes, she could still hear the hacking coughs and gasping breath of her parents and smell the dank mold that had crept insidiously up the walls. "Both our families caught scarlet fever, and our parents, your grandparents, died. They weren't the only ones, though. It swept across the whole town, and many people lost their lives. We were lucky to be spared, Davy, and that was when your Ma and I knew we would always be together. We were only 15, but that summer, I promised your Ma that as soon as I could afford it, we would get married." "And where was I?" Davy asked innocently. "I can't remember a wedding," Morgan chuckled, and swigged a mouthful of the coffee that Carrie had just poured out for him. "Never you mind about that, son. You're too young for that conversation. All you need to know is that your Ma and I will never be parted, and one day you'll carry on the Jones family name when you get wed." Davy slipped a piece of crust under the table, stroking Bella's soft head once she had gently taken it from his hand. "Will it always just be the three of us? Thomas downstairs has got another little sister. I reckon I'd like a sister too. Then we could play together." "That's in the hands of the Lord," Carrie said softly. She stood up quickly to fetch the fruitcake to the table that she had made especially for the day, not wanting Morgan to see the tears that had filled her eyes. Davy's birth had taken her 2 long and grueling days and nights. At one point, the expression on the midwife's face had convinced Carrie that the baby wouldn't survive. But eventually, just when she thought she didn't have an ounce of strength left in her, the bedroom had filled with the thin wail of a newborn, and Carrie had sobbed with relief as she held her son for the first time. "Well, now I'm 6 years old. I could take good care of a little sister," Davy declared stoutly. "Maybe he's right?" Morgan's question hung in the air, and Carrie gave a small shrug. I don't know if I could survive another one. What if I ended up in bed for a month? Like last time? You know the midwife said it was risky." Morgan frowned slightly. "I always thought we'd have a big family, Carrie, not just one boy, and it's not as if he's very robust, is it?" "He's kinda small for his age." "He's only 6 years old, Morgan," Carrie whispered. "Give him a chance. I'm sure he'll soon catch up with the other boys. I'm trying to feed him up, but it's hard when money's tight." She cut a thin slice of cake for each of them and fixed a smile to her face, determined not to let Morgan's disappointment that Davy's development seemed to be a bit behind their neighbor's rambunctious sons ruin their meal. "I hope so," Morgan muttered. "He'll need to start work as soon as he can." "The factory managers are talking about taking on more immigrant labor to keep costs down. I'm working longer hours for scarcely any more money. Something's going to have to change if the landlord puts the rent up again like he's threatening to." Later that evening, Carrie threaded her needle and pulled one of Morgan's shirts from her mending pile. She had patched it so many times that it was hard to see what color the shirt had originally been. With a worried sigh, she pinched together 2 ragged edges, hoping the new stitching would hold long enough until she could purchase some more scraps of fabric at the end of the month. "Old Mrs. Malone sends her best wishes to you," Carrie murmured. Morgan looked up from last week's newspaper he was trying to read, even though the room was gloomy. He had the lamp turned down so low the weak light scarcely reached beyond his armchair, and it was hard to decipher his expression. "I suppose she wants you to settle our bill. Does she?" Morgan crossed his arms defensively. "I already told that miserly husband of hers that I would give them the money when I get paid." He shook his head with irritation. "They're just trying to keep their heads above water, like the rest of us." She didn't mention money, actually, but she did say her sister was looking for some help. "I'm not having you scrubbing that hoity-toity woman's front steps for the whole town to see that I can't support my family." Morgan's voice rose with frustration, making Carrie shrink back in her chair. "What's the point of being too proud to let me help bring some money in if it means Davy has to go without?" "You'll make me a laughingstock, Carrie. We've been through this so many times." Morgan stood up and threw the paper down on the chair. "I'm going to the saloon. Some of the men from work are meeting to talk about whether we can ask for a pay rise." "Can't you talk to them tomorrow at the factory instead?" Carrie said hastily. "You promised you wouldn't drink." "I work hard all day. Would you deny me a tot of whiskey now and again?" Morgan cut her words off again and glared at his wife as the silence stretched between them. "It's just one drink," he finally said. The heat had gone out of his tone, and his shoulders slumped. "You're too delicate to work, Carrie. I'd rather you get better, and then we can have another son. A big, strapping boy is what we need." Carrie nodded and gave him a small smile. "I know that's what you want more than anything, Morgan, but you're working your fingers to the bone. Won't you at least let me take in some dressmaking work that I can do at home? It won't pay much, but it might be enough for medicine if Davy gets sick again in the winter." "I suppose it won't harm," Morgan said reluctantly. He patted her on the shoulder and shrugged his coat on, turning to leave. "Don't wait up. Jaunty's coming up with a plan for the best way for us to ask for more pay. It might take a while." Bella whined and came to sit under Carrie's feet as the door to their rooms slammed shut behind Morgan, and he clomped down the stairs. She hated it when Morgan raised his voice, and Carrie stroked her soft ears to reassure her. "He can't help it, girl. He's too proud to let me help. Carrie lifted her mending up again and strained her eyes in the failing light. The meager fire in the hearth was barely enough to keep the chilly draught from around her shoulders. And she tightened her woolen shawl with a shiver. She glanced around their living room, seeing the threadbare furniture with fresh eyes. Although she had done her best to make it feel homey with the rag rug in front of the hearth and a worn patchwork blanket on each of the armchairs, everything had seen better days and did little to take away from the icy draughts that whistled through the chinks in the walls when the wind was blowing from the north. He didn't used to be like this. The thought that rippled through Carrie's mind felt disloyal, but she knew it was true. Since she had failed to provide Morgan with a second or third child, he had gradually changed. His loving nature had slowly hardened into bitterness and resentment. He tried to hide it, but Carrie could tell that it filled his thoughts, and it made her feel like she had failed him. She glanced down at the flatness of her belly. 2 times since Davy's arrival, she had told him the joyful news that she was expecting another child, but both times had ended in disappointment a few short months later. Has the love really gone from our marriage? Are Davy and I not enough for him anymore? Carrie's whispered words were full of sadness as Bella nuzzled her hand, trying to comfort her mistress. Chapter 2. Waterbury, Connecticut. The screech of the factory's horn calling everyone to work ripped through the quiet morning air. Morgan yawned and stood up from the table, draining the last of his coffee. He picked up the small pack of food that Carrie had made for his lunch, tucked it inside his coat, and tousled Davy's hair. "Can we go to the circus this weekend, Pa?" Davy asked. "I promise I won't ask for anything extra. I just want to see the animals." Morgan hesitated for a moment. "I guess we could go." He put his hand in his pocket and jingled the couple of coins that were in the bottom. "You could ask Mrs. Malone if she'll wait another week for us to settle her bill?" He raised one eyebrow at Carrie. "I'll see what I can do," Carrie said hastily. It was late spring, and the circus had arrived at the edge of town. In a rare moment of generosity a few weeks ago, Morgan had promised that they could all go, but that was before the owner of the factory had told them there would be no pay rise this year. "I can pack us a picnic. Maybe we'll be able to see enough from the edge of the field without paying to go in?" Davy's face fell. "Thomas said you have to go into the big top to see the best animals. He said there's an elephant and jugglers, maybe even a lion." "Well, Thomas's pa doesn't work for Benedict Brass, does he?" Morgan muttered, feeling belittled by the mention of their wealthier neighbor. He jumped ship and got himself a better job making watches instead. "If Mr. Benedict would pay us a decent wage, we'd be able to go to the circus and not think twice about paying for it. If I can finish Elizabeth Chapman's dress today and take it for her, I'm sure she'll pay me right away, and we should have enough to go in," Carrie said quickly. "You were up most of the night stitching it already?" Morgan grumbled as he let himself out to go to work. "I'm going to ask the manager again about getting more money. It's not right to keep us short. They know the landlord is threatening to put our rent up again." He scowled and stifled another yawn. "Maybe fewer visits to the saloon would help?" Carrie said the words quietly so Davy wouldn't hear. "We need every cent, Morgan, but you've been going drinking almost every night lately." "Quit your nagging, Carrie," Morgan snapped, not caring whether Davy heard or not. "A man should be allowed a few pleasures in life. You're up all night dressmaking instead of keeping me warm in bed, and the manager's on at me all day long telling me to work faster." His voice had risen to a shout which echoed down the stairs. "Stop that hollering. I'm trying to get the baby to sleep." Madeline Lynch from downstairs leaned out into the stairwell and shouted back, "You already woke me up coming home drunk last night, and now you're shouting again first thing in the morning." Morgan scowled again at her words. "Don't be angry, Pa," Davy cried. "Thomas said his ma is exhausted from looking after his new little baby sister. She has the sweetest dimples, but he said she doesn't sleep much at night." "Mind your manners, boy," Morgan snapped, glaring at both of them. "If I want to shout in my own home, I will. I'm the one keeping a roof over our heads and putting food on the table. But all I get is more demands. You used to be so much nicer, Carrie, but I swear you're turning out to be just as miserable as your old ma was. My parents always said she made your pa unhappy, and now it feels like history's repeating itself." Carrie gasped at his unkind words and glanced at Davy, who was blinking back tears. "That's not true. My parents loved each other. And we're happy enough, aren't we?" Morgan scowled again, but had the good grace to look slightly apologetic. "I just can't see how life will ever get better for us, is all." He gestured at their rooms and shook his head. "Is this it? Just a struggle every day with nothing to look forward to?" He pulled a small bottle from his coat pocket and took a swig, gasping as the whiskey burned the back of his throat. "This is all that keeps me going at the moment," he added, looking at the bottle with an expression that defied Carrie to say anything. "I'll finish the dress and see if I can take more on," Carrie replied quietly, not giving him the satisfaction of rising to his unspoken challenge. "We'll talk again this evening, Morgan. We have each other, and good friends, and neighbors. We can be happy with what we have. I know we can. Please don't drink any more whiskey today. What if they smell it on you at work?" She jumped up quickly and ran over to kiss him goodbye, but before she could, he had already turned his back to clatter down the stairs. "Why is Pa cross with us, Ma?" Davy slipped his hand into Carrie's and looked up at her with a confused expression. "Did I do something wrong, talking about the circus? I don't mind if we can't go." Carrie knelt down in front of her son and wrapped him in an embrace, brushing the tears from his cheeks. "He's not cross with us, Davy, at least not with you." She gave him a sudden smile. "Why don't we go to Mrs. Malone's after I've finished her sister's dress? I'll treat you to a couple of pieces of toffee, but it will be our secret, all right? Pa doesn't need to know." Davy nodded solemnly before turning to clear the table from their breakfast. He knew that his ma needed to get on with her sewing, and that if he helped out, she would finish faster. Carrie pulled her chair closer to the window, where the light was better, and rolled her shoulders to get the knots out of her muscles. Her eyes felt gritty with tiredness from sewing in the weak light for most of the night, but she had no choice. They needed the money. She sighed and threaded her needle again, thinking about their situation. She hadn't dared to tell Morgan that the landlord had visited last night while he had been at the saloon. "I can't keep putting it off, I'm afraid." Reg Garrett had filled the doorway, leaning against it with the nonchalant air of being the person who held all the power. "You're lucky I've kept it so low for this long," he continued, giving her a thin smile that didn't reach his eyes. "The rent will be going up next month. I've got to think about my own family, Mrs. Jones." He had leaned closer, with a gleam in his eyes that made her shudder. "Of course, if Morgan can't quite earn enough to meet the new amount, maybe you and I could come to some sort of arrangement." His gaze had lingered on her shapely figure, and he had just chuckled when Carrie had told him crisply that they would pay the new rent in full before closing the door firmly in his face. The next few hours passed peacefully. Carrie's needle flew in and out of the fabric as she attached lace trim and added extra ruffles to Elizabeth Chapman's silk dress, with stitches so tiny they were almost invisible to the naked eye. Davy pored over the books he adored so much, and he frowned with concentration as he tried to read the stories that were in them, stumbling over the harder words. "I wish I was a cowboy, Ma," he said when he had finished. He looked at the colorful cover of his favorite book, which depicted a rancher on the front, rounding up cattle on horseback. "I'd crack my whip and have them rounded up in no time, and then we'd sit by the campfire and tell stories, with the mountains behind us." His eyes shone as he tried to picture himself far away from the smog of the factories and the stench of molten metal that often seeped into their home. "We'd have a little log cabin at the edge of a meadow and a few chickens scratching in the dirt." Carrie played along with him, pausing from her sewing for a moment to rest her eyes. "I'd have a garden out back to grow fresh vegetables, and maybe a couple of apple trees. We could have apple pie whenever you wanted it." "And I'd have a little sister, too," Davy added, jumping up and pacing around their small room. "I'd make her a swing in the apple tree, and we'd go into town in our own horse and cart." "It sounds like a wonderful life," Carrie said wistfully, glancing at the book cover that had a rugged cowboy on the front. She realized with a start that although they often daydreamed about living out west, Davy never really mentioned Morgan in his new made-up life. She tried to imagine her husband resettling far away from the Benedict brass factory and the town they had lived in for as long as she could remember, but her mind remained stubbornly blank. "When I'm older, I'm going to be a rancher, Ma. Just you wait and see. I'll make lots of money and look after you." Davy twisted one of their rickety wooden chairs around, throwing his leg over it and pretending to ride it like a horse. Carrie chuckled and shook her head slightly. "Maybe we'd better wait until you're a bit stronger if you're going to handle a big old horse riding through the mountains." She carried on with the final seam of the dress as Davy filled the kettle and stoked the range to warm the leftover stew for their lunch. A thought slipped into her mind. I wish it was true. Maybe Morgan would be happier with a fresh start, far away from here. Carrie pondered the idea, but knew it would never be more than an idle daydream. Waterbury was all they knew, and they didn't have enough spare money to try and make a new life elsewhere. After she and Davy had eaten a small portion of leftover stew, Carrie carefully folded the dress and laid it in her basket, covering it with a piece of muslin so there would be no chance of any dust or dirt landing on it. Mrs. Malone's sister, Elizabeth, was her best customer, and she didn't want to do anything that might risk her paying less than the few dollars this job would bring. Davy skipped alongside her on their way to the Chapman's grand house on the edge of town. Elizabeth hadn't started life wealthy, but had married above her station, and her husband, Edward, was rumored to have several businesses that were doing very well. "Do you think I'll be able to go back to school soon, Ma?" "I sure do, Miss Thomas." Carrie gave her son an encouraging smile. He was small for his age and always prone to catching whatever illnesses were doing the rounds. The midwife had told her it was because his birth had been earlier than it should have been, and she felt a pang of guilt that her body hadn't given him the best start in life. "Any day now, Davy. It's safer to keep you home during the cold winter months. There was so much influenza going around." As if to underline her point, Davy stopped abruptly to cough for several minutes. There was a sulphurous cloud hanging over the poorer end of town where they lived, with no breeze to clear the air, and it didn't take much to set him off coughing. Once he had stopped, they resumed their walk, and a half-hour later had arrived at the sweeping driveway leading up to the Chapmans' elegant house. "This is delightful, Carrie. You have a real talent for dressmaking. I'm so glad Jane sent you to come and inquire for work." Elizabeth peered more closely at the dress and shook her head, marveling at Carrie's tiny stitches. "This will do me very nicely for the fundraiser ball next month." "Thank you, ma'am." There was an awkward pause as Carrie tried to summon the courage to ask for her payment. "Do you think— Oh, you'd like to be paid, I suppose? I usually let Mrs. Clark take care of settling up with people, but she's visiting her aunt for a few days." Elizabeth looked perplexed for a moment before rummaging in the small desk in the corner of her parlor. "Take this for now and come back next week for Mrs. Clark to write it in the housekeeping ledger." She passed some coins over quickly, as though the idea of dealing with money was slightly distasteful. "Thank you, Mrs. Chapman," Carrie replied, slipping the money into her apron pocket. "Is there anything else you would like me to do for you?" She tried to keep the note of desperation from her voice, but didn't quite manage it, and Elizabeth shot her a look of sympathy. "Wait here, and I'll fetch another gown that needs your attention. I have more than enough to keep you busy." She smiled as she saw the look of relief flood Carrie's face. "I know I live a charmed life now, but I haven't forgotten my roots," Elizabeth said. "Jane makes sure of it," she added with a wry smile. She bustled away to fetch the next dress for Carrie. "Look at how grand everything is, Ma." Davy gazed around the parlor at the gleaming silver candlesticks on the mahogany sideboard and the gold-embossed spines of the books lining the shelves next to the large fireplace. He reached out to pick up an ornament on the occasional table, and Carrie pulled him back sharply. "Don't touch, Davy. I'd never forgive myself if we broke something." Davy clamped his arms tightly to his sides and gazed at the books instead, wishing that he could choose one to take home. Here we are. Elizabeth hurried back into the parlor with an armful of dusky pink fabric folded over her arm. Apparently, this color is all the rage for this season, she added with a tinkling laugh. Instead of doing some mending, I'd like you to make me a summer dress, please, Carrie. Something nice and cool for when the weather warms up. We'll keep it the same style as the last one, and then you can make me a light shawl to go with it afterward. Carrie nodded gratefully. I'll do it as quickly as I can, Mrs. Chapman. If it's anything like last summer, you'll need it soon. Thank you, dear. Elizabeth looked at Davy, following his gaze. Do you like to read? She asked. Oh, yes, it's my favorite thing to do. I like cowboy stories best of all. I ain't never seen so many books as what you've got here, ma'am. Davy looked longingly at the shelves again. I'll ask Mrs. Clark if we have any old books we don't need anymore. You can choose one to take home with you when you come next time. Davy's face lit up. Thank you, Mrs. Chapman. You're the best. Wait till I tell Thomas. I'm not sure we have any cowboy stories, but perhaps a book about horses might be nice. Elizabeth turned and ran her finger along the spines of the books. Here, how about this? A book all about the Rocky Mountains. It's even got some copperplate pictures in it. Mr. Chapman went there for business once and brought this back for me, but I must confess I've never read it. She pulled the book out and nudged the books next to it closer together to cover the gap. He won't even notice it's gone, she said, giving Davy a wink as she handed it to him. Are you sure? Carrie blushed at Elizabeth's unexpected generosity. Of course, she replied firmly. You work hard, Mrs. Jones, and I know Davy isn't always in the best of health to attend school. Besides, it's nice to encourage a boy who wants to learn. Davy clutched the book to his chest as if it was treasure and gave Elizabeth a small bow. I promise I'll look after it better than anything, he said solemnly. The clock in the hall chimed. Goodness me, is that the time already? Carrie gathered up her things and took Davy's hand. We must go and get Pa's dinner ready. Remember, my offer of more work still stands, Mrs. Jones. Elizabeth walked with them and opened the door to let them out. Like I said when you first came here, I'm always looking for good maids to have in our household. The dressmaking is more than enough. Thank you, Mrs. Chapman. Carrie paused for a moment on the threshold. I appreciate the offer, but Morgan prefers me to work at home. I'm sure you understand. As she hurried away, Carrie sighed, wondering whether Elizabeth knew that the reason why she found it so hard to keep maids for long was because her husband George had a reputation for being overfamiliar with them. Rumor had it that the last maid had left at the dead of night and had been spotted a couple of months later in a nearby town with her pregnancy clear for all to see. What was more worrying was that it had been George Chapman who had suggested she could be a maid for them. The first time, she had gone to ask if Elizabeth had any mending she would like her to do. He had cornered her in the parlor when Elizabeth had gone to fetch their housekeeper and whispered flirtatiously that he would like it very much if Carrie could work in the house rather than taking the dresses away to mend. Carrie had been so shocked that it was only walking home afterward that she had realized what his intentions were. She had been trying to politely turn down Elizabeth's requests that she should become a maid for them ever since, but her pleas for Carrie to reconsider were becoming more pressing each time she visited. Chapter 3. Waterbury, Connecticut. Did Pa say he was going to be late tonight? Davy finished laying up the table for dinner and picked up his new book again. I want to show him everything I've learned about Ma. Look at the picture of these mountains. Montana looks even more wonderful than I imagined it would. He turned the pages over carefully, smiling to himself. I reckon this is where we'll have our ranch, Ma. I just need to get a good job when I'm old enough, and this is where we'll head to. I can't wait. Carrie glanced at the copperplate image with a wistful sigh. The snow-topped mountains and rugged log cabins in the picture looked idyllic. It would be perfect for Davy's health to live somewhere like that. The sound of heavy footsteps passing their door and continuing to the rooms on the floor above theirs made her look at the clock on the mantel shelf again. I'm sure Pa will be home any minute, she said, as much to convince herself as Davy. Bella stood up from the rag rug and stretched, wagging her tail as Carrie took the ham out of the oven to stop it from drying out. "There won't be any for you, you little scamp," Carrie said with a chuckle. "You should be catching a mouse, not begging for scraps." Bella twirled on the spot, trying to catch her tail, before jumping up onto Davy's lap and settling down for another snooze. "I hope he hasn't gone to the saloon again," Carrie muttered to herself, peering through the window again. She felt a pang of worry. Morgan had promised he would come straight home, and she was looking forward to telling him that Elizabeth had paid her generously for the alterations she had done on her gown. There would be enough money for them to go to the circus if she was frugal with their food the following week. Suddenly, the peaceful evening was shattered as a shout echoed up the stairs. "Carrie, are you there?" Carrie darted to the door and flung it open to look down the stairs. "What's wrong, Jethro? Is Madeline okay? It's not the baby, is it?" Thomas said she was struggling to get to sleep at night. Her stomach lurched with alarm as she saw the concern etched on their neighbor's face. Jethro Lynch puffed up the stairs. He had grown unfit since leaving the brass factory to go and make watches instead, and his words came out in gasps. "It's Morgan. I was walking past Benedict's on my way home, and I heard shouting. He's been in an accident. The doctor is there now." Carrie clasped her hands to her chest, feeling wretched that she had assumed Morgan had gone to the saloon. "How bad is it?" she demanded. Her heart sank as she remembered the bottle of whiskey Morgan had been drinking from before going to work. "One of the men told me Morgan got his hand trapped in one of the rollers. It's not looking good, Carrie. You know how heavy they are." He shot Carrie a troubled look. He also said Moran didn't seem himself today, complaining about not being paid enough, reckoned he could smell whiskey on him. I don't want to get him into trouble. Jethro, you probably know the rent's going up. Morgan's been worried about how we're going to pay for it, that's all." Carrie bit her lip, not wanting to be disloyal. "Well, worrying about money can make even the most sensible man lose his concentration, I reckon." Jethro patted her shoulder. "I know you're going to want to go down there, but the doctor said for me to tell you to wait at home here until there's more news. He's not sure if Morgan will lose his hand or not. There was a lot of blood. It was hard to see what damage has been done." "Oh no, what will become of us if Morgan can't work anymore?" Tears filled Carrie's eyes, and she blinked them back as Davy appeared, wanting to know what was happening. "Pa's been in an accident, son. We must pray that he'll be all right and wait here until we hear more from the doctor." She turned her dark eyes to Jethro again. "Thank you for letting us know. Are you sure I can't go down there?" Jethro shook his head. "No, Carrie. The brass rolling mill is dirty and dangerous. It's no place for a woman. The doctor said he would bandage Morgan up. I'm sure he'll be home soon enough." Davy tucked his hand into Carrie's and lifted his chin in a determined fashion. "I'll help you get things ready at home, Ma. Remember when we had to bandage Bella's paw when she ripped it? We'll need lots of hot water, and I can give Pa my pillow so he can rest more comfortably in bed." "When did you get so grown up?" Carrie murmured with a watery smile. "You're right. We'll nurse Pa back to health and pray for his hand not to be too damaged. Thank you, Jethro. I appreciate your neighborliness. I'm glad I heard the news from you, and not just from someone I don't know from Benedict Brass." "Think nothing of it. That's what friends are for, ain't it? I expect Madeline will be up soon with some of her tinctures to help Morgan get better. She said that dress you made for little Rosie is the sweetest thing ever." Jethro's eyes softened as he spoke of his new daughter, making Carrie smile. Carrie felt as though she might explode from worry. Her instinct was to run straight to the factory to comfort Morgan, but Jethro had been insistent that she shouldn't. She picked up her sewing but couldn't concentrate, so she paced back and forth in the kitchen, hurrying to look out of the window every time she heard voices outside. "Will Pa be all right? We won't have to leave our home, will we?" Davy's face creased with concern as he voiced the thing Carrie was most anxious about. "We'll be fine, Davy. Your pa's made of strong stuff." She gave him a reassuring smile, even though she was far from certain Morgan would be able to work again. She already knew that their landlord, Reg Garrett, didn't have a compassionate bone in his body. The fact that Morgan might need months off work to recover would probably only make him more determined to make Carrie pay for the rise in rent, in whatever way he wanted. She shuddered, remembering the way his gaze had lingered on her narrow waist with lust in his eyes. "I'll just take in more sewing work. We'll be okay." At long last, just as the sun was setting, shuffling footsteps on the stairs announced that Morgan was home. "I've given him laudanum for the pain." Dr. Fraser unhooked Morgan's arm from where he had been supporting it carefully, and they helped him into bed. "Sorry, lost my concentration. Is good for now. But I'll be all right." Morgan's words were slurred and his eyes were out of focus as he tried to reassure Carrie. He chuckled and lifted the heavily bandaged hand before grimacing in pain again. "Just be a week or two and I'll be back at Benedict's in no time." His head lolled back on the pillow and he was asleep within seconds. "Is that true, doctor?" Carrie steered him into the kitchen and gave him a direct stare. "Tell me the worst, please. I need to know." Dr. Fraser sucked in his cheeks and shook his head. "These types of injuries are always difficult to judge, Mrs. Jones. I can't say either way. Several of his fingers have been badly damaged and the skin has been ripped away as well. It could heal well, or..." He didn't finish his sentence. "All I can do is nurse him and pray that he gets over this," Carrie said quietly. "I appreciate your honesty." The doctor gave her a sympathetic smile and handed her a brown glass bottle. "Keep the wounds clean and dressed, and give him more of this laudanum if he needs it. I'll call in if I'm passing, but there's not much more I can do." "And what about paying you?" Carrie gulped, wondering if they had enough money for the rent and to pay for the doctor's services. "It's been a bit of a shock for you, Mrs. Jones. Let's settle up next time I call, shall we? There are too many accidents happening at the factory for my liking. But I have to be honest. I could smell whiskey on your husband's breath when I was treating him. It won't do him any favors when they're deciding whether to keep him on or not." Carrie felt her cheeks flush. "He's not a bad man, doctor. He's been struggling a bit, that's all. I'll make sure you have everything you're owed the next time you call." "I know you will. You're a woman of honor." Dr. Fraser lifted his hat, giving Carrie and Davy a warm smile. "Be helpful and look after your pa, young man, and I'll see you both soon. Morgan was very lucky. It could have been a lot worse. I've seen men lose their whole arm in accidents on the rollers." "Ma, wake up. Pa's breathing sounds strange." Carrie jerked awake in the chair next to her bed at the sound of Davy's whispered words. It was several days since Morgan's accident, and she hadn't snatched more than a few minutes' sleep when she knew that he was resting. "I must have nodded off. Sorry, Davy." Carrie jumped up and leaned over Morgan. She could see instantly that something was wrong. His face had turned a sickly gray color, and there was a sheen of sweat on his brow that hadn't been there earlier. "I'll put more water on the stove to boil, shall I, Ma?" Davy hurried into the kitchen, leaving his parents alone. Morgan, can you hear me?" "Wake up." Carrie gently shook her husband, but he didn't respond. His breathing sounded labored in the quietness of their bedroom, and Carrie shivered with a terrible sense of foreboding. She pressed her hand to his forehead and felt the scorching heat on her palm. "Never mind boiling more water, son. Run and fetch the doctor instead. Pa's got a fever." Davy scampered down the stairs as Carrie started to dab the sweat off Morgan with a cool, damp cloth. "Come along, Morgan. We need you to get better. We miss you." Carrie felt the panic rising in her chest and gasped with relief as Morgan's eyes flickered open again. He reached for her hand with his good arm and squeezed it. "I don't feel so good, Carrie. Will you read to me? I like to hear your voice and know that I'm not alone." "Of course, my love. I've been praying for the Lord to spare you. I won't leave your side for a single minute until you're well again." Carrie reached blindly for the nearest book, and her hand fell on the one that Davy had been reading to his father the night before. She flicked it open and started to read aloud for him. The mountains stretched to the horizon, covered with snow in the winter. But in the spring, the meadows below the snow line nod with wildflowers, and the lush pastures are ideal for cattle and other livestock. Many ranchers make a decent life, raising animals and gradually taming the wild country into a living that will support their family and those for generations to come. Morgan's mouth curved into a soft smile. Sounds like a grand place to be, don't you think? I can tell Davy's quite taken with the idea of being a cowboy out west. Carrie leaned closer, trying to catch his words. It's just a daydream of his, Morgan. She stroked the side of his face. We're happy enough here in Waterbury. Things will get better for us soon. Maybe we'll have another baby as well? Morgan's eyelids were growing heavy again, but he turned his head to look at Carrie. If I don't make it, don't say that, Carrie interjected, cutting off his words. We said we would always be together. Just rest up and the doctor will be here in a minute. Morgan squeezed her hand again. Listen to me, Carrie. I have to say this before it's too late. He paused for a moment, his face starting to turn slightly mottled with the effort of trying to speak. You have my blessing, to. He shuddered as the fever took hold, creeping stealthily through his body like a fire licking through tinder-dry branches. You must make a new life for you and Davy. The last words came out so faintly that Carrie had to strain to hear them. You must find another husband, marry, don't struggle alone. Chapter 4. Waterbury, Connecticut. I'm very sorry, Mrs. Jones. Morgan contracted blood poisoning from his wounds. There was nothing more that we could have done. It can take a person's life in a matter of hours, I'm afraid to say. As Carrie scrubbed the kitchen floor, the repetitive action of the bristled brush in the suds allowed her mind to wander, and she thought back to Dr. Fraser's words on that fateful evening 2 weeks earlier. He had come as quickly as he could, but it had been too late to stop the fever from wreaking its terrible damage. In her heart, she had already known that Morgan wouldn't last the night, so she had knelt next to the bed and poured her soul out in prayer, thanking the Lord for the time they had had together and begging that he might not suffer at the end. His final moments had been peaceful, with her and Davy by his side. She was grateful for that, at least. And now she was gradually adapting to the fact that she was a widow at the age of 24, with a son to bring up all alone. Morgan had started thrashing in the bed sheets as the fever took hold, whispering in a hoarse, incoherent voice that he had plenty of money put aside for the family, hidden away for them under the floorboard next to the fireplace. But after his burial, when Carrie had remembered his words and prized up the wood to look, there were scarcely enough coins in the pouch she discovered to pay for a week's rent. Like a wolf scenting its prey, Reg Garrett had knocked sharply at their door within a week of Morgan's passing. I heard the news and wanted to give you my condolences, he had said, tucking his thumbs into the vest that strained over his rotund belly. I'd like to say I could postpone putting your rent up. You know I'm very reasonable in that way. He had shaken his head as though the matter was out of his hands. I have to think of my own expenses, though, Mrs. Jones. Or can I call you Carrie? How about we come up with a different arrangement so you don't have to struggle with money? He had licked his lips and glanced over her shoulder to check that Davy was out of earshot before lounging nonchalantly against the doorframe. A man can get lonely, you know, out all day collecting rents. It would be nice to have somewhere to stop by for a cup of coffee and some company. Perhaps we could say twice a week? Carrie scrubbed the floor harder, trying to obliterate the memory of their landlord's dreadful suggestion from her mind. She had taken great satisfaction in shoving the rent money they owed into his pudgy hand and slamming the door in his face, but she knew he would return for more soon enough, no doubt getting more insistent each time. She sat back on her heels and wiped her soapy arm across her forehead, pushing her dark hair from her eyes. How am I going to manage, Bella? Even if I double the amount of dressmaking work, it won't be enough. Carrie stroked the dog's soft ears, taking comfort from her warm body that nestled against hers. Bella whined and looked at her with a sad gaze, picking up on her mistress's distress. Maybe I should speak to Elizabeth about the maid's job, huh, Bella? It's not as if I've got many choices, is it? The dog thumped her tail and then yapped as someone knocked at their door. It's only me, dear. Madeline Lynch from downstairs let herself in, hitching baby Rosie higher on her hip. I've made more bread than we need, so I figured you and Davy might like some. She put a basket on the table, and the enticing aroma of freshly baked bread wafted out from under the muslin cloth. You're so kind, Madeline. I don't know how we would have managed without your help. How's little Rosie? Is she sleeping better yet? Carrie pulled the kettle onto the hot plate of the stove and added a small pinch of tea leaves to the teapot. Now that you ask, yes, I think we've finally got her into a better routine. Mind you, she'll be teething before long, and then we'll have to start all over, won't we, my poppet? Madeline tickled Rosie under her chin, making her giggle, then bounced her up and down on her knee. Carrie watched them fondly and felt a sharp pang of longing. Now that she was a widow, she might never have the opportunity to have another baby. She took a deep breath, reminding herself how lucky she was to have Davy. The only thing she could focus on at the moment was earning enough money for them to survive. As if reading her thoughts, Madeline gave her an inquisitive look. Any news on getting more work from Elizabeth Chapman? Maybe she's got some well-to-do friends who could make use of your dressmaking skills. Carrie poured the tea and put a cup next to Madeline, handing Rosie a crust to suck on. I've decided I'll have to swallow my pride and see if the offer of being a maid for them is still there. If I keep my wits about me, hopefully, I'll be able to keep out of George's way, although I hear he's not one to give up easily when a young woman catches his eye. Madeline pursed her lips. He's a dreadful man. It's not right that he pesters the maids the way he does. Poor Elizabeth, having to put up with the shame of it as well. She took a sip of tea. He'll probably be even worse with you, knowing that you've lost your husband. Carrie's gaze went automatically to the chair Morgan had always sat in at the head of the table, and she shrugged. It's not just him. I'm dreading another visit from Reg Garrett for the rent money. If there was a way out of all this, I'd seize it with both hands. But what choice does a widow like me have? I wish things were different, but this is what the Lord has given us, and I have to accept it. Madeline pulled the basket closer and delved in it with her free hand. I've been thinking about your situation, dear. It was ever since Davy brought that book around to show Thomas. Thick as thieves they were, poring over it all afternoon. Davy seemed quite convinced that he'd like to be a cowboy. I let him enjoy the daydream, Madeline. It takes his mind off losing his pa, so I reckon it doesn't harm. Well, that's why I want to show you this. Madeline pulled a newspaper out of the basket and shook it open before handing it to Carrie. The Matrimonial Times. There are lots of advertisements in there for gentlemen out west looking for a mail-order bride. Oh, I couldn't possibly. The words burst out of Carrie's mouth, cutting across Madeline. Morgan's only been gone a few weeks. I mean, he did say I should remarry, but not so soon, surely. It's not something you have to rush into, my dear. I quite agree. But I've taken the liberty of looking at some of the advertisements, and it seems you would correspond for a few months, getting to know the gentleman who you decide to express an interest in. Madeline took another sip of her tea and nodded at the paper to encourage her friend to read it. Carrie felt her gaze pulled toward the words in spite of her reluctance. She had heard of mail-order brides and had even known of several young women who had left Waterbury and traveled far away to get married. But she had never given it any heed, knowing that she was already married for life. But you're not married now, are you? You're widowed and alone. The thought snaked into her mind, and she felt her throat closing up as tears threatened. Did Morgan speak to you about what he wished for you after his accident? Madeline asked gently. Carrie hesitated and then gave a brief nod. He said he didn't want me to struggle. He said he gave me his blessing to remarry, but he was in the grip of the fever, she added hastily. What if he didn't really mean it? I would feel too disloyal. We've been together since we were 15 years old, and I've known him all my life. How could I ever love another man? He wouldn't have wanted you and Davy to get into debt and end up homeless, Carrie. Besides, I believe things happen for a reason, don't you? Maybe it was fate, Elizabeth giving you that book. Davy's captivated by the idea of moving to Montana, and you know his health would be better for it. Obviously, you never would have moved away with Morgan, because he had a job here in Waterbury, and it's where your family first settled. But things have changed. Maybe this is what the Lord wants for you. To be cared for by a kindly gentleman and have a second chance. It might not be love at first sight, but you could grow to be fond of someone again, I'm sure. It might even blossom into love, given a bit of time. You're still only young. You deserve to be happy again. Carrie felt a ripple of emotion surge through her. Partly regret for everything she would be leaving behind, but also, for the first time since Morgan's death, she felt the faintest glimmerings of something like hope. He had said very clearly that he wanted her to remarry. She just hadn't considered that it might be as a mail-order bride. I'm not promising anything, but I'll have a look, that's all. She folded the paper up and tucked it under a mound of fabric on the chair behind her so Davy wouldn't see it. That's the way, Madeline said happily. Now, why don't you give Rosie a cuddle? Who knows, maybe if you meet someone new, you might have a few more little ones yourself one day, too. She beamed as Carrie lifted Rosie onto her lap and gazed at her adoringly. It had been Thomas's suggestion to show Carrie the matrimonial times, and she knew that, although she would miss Carrie and Davy living upstairs from them, it had been the right thing to do. They deserved a fresh start in life, and she was determined to help make it happen. After Davy had gone to bed, Carrie warily lit the lamp by the fire and shook out the muslin dress that Elizabeth had given her to alter to make it more fashionable. Her fingers felt the rustle of the paper under the fabric, and she pulled it out hesitantly, angling it toward the light so she could read it. She jumped guiltily as she heard the springs of Davy's bed creak, but a moment later, his breathing was quiet and regular again, telling her that he was fast asleep. She scanned the advertisements, marveling that there were so many different places listed. I could go wherever I wanted if I was inclined to, she murmured to Bella. California, Oregon. She trailed her finger down the page, dismissing most of them. Suddenly, a small advertisement with a swirling font caught her eye, and she read it slowly. Seeking courtship via correspondence with a young lady who would like to travel west and marry. I have my own ranch and live with my mother. I have never married and would welcome inquiries from a single woman or a widow with a child. In return for marriage, we will provide a warm welcome, companionship, and a pleasant country life with horses and livestock. A God-fearing woman of a practical nature and gentle disposition will be considered ideal. Melvin Tate, Blossom Creek, Montana, via the Happy Hearts Matrimonial Agency. The fact that it was Montana immediately brought Davy's book to mind, and Carrie's imagination was filled with the lush green meadows and snow-capped mountains. She glanced at Davy's old storybook with the rugged cowboy on the front, and her heart beat a little faster. It says he doesn't mind a widow who already has a child, Bella. What do you think? The dog jumped up and wagged her tail, with her mouth open in a doggy smile that made Carrie chuckle. Since Madeline had given her the newspaper, the one thing which had been pressing on her mind was the fact that whoever she remarried would have to welcome Davy too. She knew she wouldn't be able to bear it if a future husband felt that Davy was a burden or made to feel as though he didn't belong. She scanned some of the other advertisements, but most of them seemed to either gush with promises of love, which made her feel racked with guilt about Morgan, or mentioned that they would like to start their own family. She sighed, trying to imagine herself in the arms of another man, but it made her feel prickly with discomfort. He's looking for companionship, Bella. That sounds better. I think perhaps I might be able to manage that without feeling as though I was betraying Morgan. And if he's taking care of his mother, this Melvin Tate must be a kind and thoughtful sort of person. Bella wagged her tail again and nuzzled Carrie's hand with her nose. I suppose it wouldn't harm to reply and express an interest, Carrie added quietly. He'll probably get so many letters back, I won't hear anything anyway. As the quietness of the night enveloped her, Carrie thought about how she would have to fend off Reg's advances next time he called for the rent money, and how George Chapman would try to engineer excuses to corner her the next time she was taking on a new dressmaking order, as he had done before. She spoke into the empty room quietly. Please forgive me if it's too soon, Morgan. I don't know if it's the right thing to do, but I have to take care of Davy, and I think a clean start out west might be our best solution. As though hearing her thoughts, a sudden gust of wind rustled the curtains at the window. and Carrie came to a decision. She sat at the table and quickly penned a reply, explaining to Melvin Tate that she thought his ranch sounded delightful and she would very much like to be considered as his future bride. Chapter 5, Waterbury, Connecticut. What if I'm making a terrible mistake, Madeline? I never imagined he would even write back to me, let alone send a proposal less than a couple of months later. Carrie's hands trembled slightly as she pulled Melvin's latest letter from her apron pocket. She had already read it so many times the edges were looking slightly worn. "Read it out to me again, dear." Madeline mashed up some cooked fruit and oatmeal and spooned a tiny portion into Rosie's mouth, making her squeal with excitement as she gave them both a gummy smile. Carrie nodded and started to read out loud. "Dear Carrie, I feel as though I have come to know you very well through our letters these last few weeks, and I find myself looking forward to receiving them. Ma and I both enjoy reading about your life at Waterbury, but I can tell that times are hard for you as a widow with a son. I won't profess to be a great romantic like some gentlemen. I work hard on the ranch, and looking after Ma takes up my evenings, as she had become frailer since we had such a hard winter. I think the time has come to lay my cards on the table. I would like you to travel out to become my wife, if that's what you would like. Davy will enjoy the ranch, from what you say, and you will have the security you need as well. I hope that in the fullness of time we will come to love each other. However, I understand that you would like time to adjust to life at the ranch. We have a room which can be for you and Davy, and my mother will be here at all times, so your reputation won't be compromised if we wait a little while until the wedding. I enclose money for your travel expenses, and I will collect you from the station at Blossom Creek. Yours sincerely, Melvin Tate." Carrie put the letter down again and looked at Madeline. "Davy's been hoping this would happen since I told him I was corresponding with a rancher. But what if he's different from how he comes across in his letters, Madeline? It's a big risk, leaving everything behind. Think about next winter, though, Carrie. You know how the smog from the factories plays havoc with Davy's health. If you stay here, he would probably end up going to work in one of the factories like his pa. The doctor always said that fresh air would do him the world of good." "You're right," Carrie said slowly. "I've just got cold feet about agreeing to marry a man I've never even met before." Madeline raised her eyebrows and smiled. "There are plenty of wives who've found themselves in a bad marriage with someone they thought they knew really well." She scooped another spoon of food into Daisy's mouth. "Melvin sounds like a hard-working person. From what you've told me, he doesn't drink, he takes good care of his mother, and he owns Rocky Ranch. And he's only 30 years old, you say? It sounds like he's the perfect man for you, Carrie. Don't go looking for faults when there aren't any." Carrie felt her worries recede. "When you put it like that, I guess I should just be grateful and say yes," she replied with a chuckle. "I wouldn't leave it a moment longer. Why don't you write straight back accepting his proposal and go and book your train ticket now? There's only so many times you can fend off Reg Garrett's advances, and you said yourself, the money you're earning dressmaking isn't enough to make ends meet. I'm glad you think I'm doing the right thing." Carrie folded the letter up again and stood up. "I can't wait to tell Reg we're leaving," she added with a sudden grin. "I just hope I never have to come back with my tail between my legs because things didn't work out." She felt the money in her pocket and knew that she only had enough to do the journey one way. Coming back to Waterbury wouldn't be an option, even if it was what she wanted. "Look on the bright side, dear. I've been praying every night that this would be the start of something better for you and Davy, and it looks like my prayers have been answered. You'll be in Blossom Creek soon, and you'll never have to deal with the likes of Reg Garrett again." The train rumbled through the unfamiliar landscape, and Carrie smiled at the young woman sitting opposite her and Davy. She had avoided Carrie's eye for the first couple of days, staring resolutely out of the window or reading a book when she wasn't asleep. "How far are you traveling?" Carrie asked. "We're going to Blossom Creek. I'm Carrie, and this is my boy, Davy." The woman jumped slightly at being spoken to and twisted the edge of her handkerchief. "I'm Ivy Jordan, She touched the locket at her neck, which Carrie had seen her do repeatedly like a nervous tick, before adding, "I'm going to Blossom Creek, too. It's a tiring journey, that's for sure, but I hope it will be worth it when we get there. Are you traveling to take up a work position, or for something else?" Ivy touched the locket again and stared at Davy, who had his nose pressed to the window, not wanting to miss a single thing that they were passing. "I'm a mail-order bride," she mumbled in a low voice. Her cheeks flushed pink with embarrassment. "The same as me," Carrie said warmly. "I'm a bit nervous, but I reckon that's only to be expected. We're going to live at a place called Rocky Ranch, and I'm going to learn how to be a cowboy," Davy said, overhearing their conversation. Even though he was tired, his face still shone with excitement at the thought of his dream coming true. "Are you going to live on a ranch as well? Maybe we'll be neighbors." Ivy smiled slightly and shook her head. "No, I'm marrying a man who has a saloon, although I shouldn't really be here." Her eyes filled with tears, and she dabbed them away with her handkerchief. "I'm sorry, did I say something wrong?" Davy looked at his ma with worry. "Why don't you have a little walk up the carriage and stretch your legs, Davy? It's a while until the next stop." Carrie waited until Davy had left. "Are you all right, Ivy? What's upsetting you?" Ivy gave her a watery smile. "I never thought I would resort to doing such a thing as this. I was meant to be marrying my childhood sweetheart, Albert. But, her lip wobbled and fresh tears rolled down her cheeks. "He jilted me on the morning we were meant to get married and ran away with my best friend. I'm so sorry. What a horrible thing to do." Carrie patted Ivy's knee. "I know it won't be much comfort to you, but perhaps it was better to find out he was like that before you married, rather than afterward." Ivy gulped and nodded. "But that's not all. I found out I was in the family way, and my pa said I had to leave immediately. He said that if I stayed, I would bring shame on the family." Carrie's heart went out to the young girl. Ivy only looked to be about 17 years old, and she felt a surge of anger that she had been abandoned by the people who should have looked after her in her time of need. "Well, I hope your new husband takes good care of you, Ivy. I know being a mail-order bride is a little unconventional, but my friend told me something you might like to consider, too, when I was having second thoughts. She said, who knows where we might find love. Sometimes a fresh start is just what we need, don't you think?" "I suppose so." Ivy conceded. "What about your situation?" she added shyly. "My husband had an accident at the brass factory. Davy has been hankering to live on a ranch ever since he first started looking at books about it, and the doctor told me the clean mountain air will be better for his health." Carrie shrugged. "The gentleman I'm meeting, he hasn't promised me love, but he's offering us security, I suppose. It was hard for me to give Davy what he needed back home." The next couple of days passed quickly as they chugged across the vast landscape. Now that Ivy had overcome her shyness, she had become more talkative, and Carrie warmed to her, hoping that they might still stay friends once they arrived at their destination. The sun beat down on the train, and Davy dozed quietly when he wasn't reading his book about Montana and telling Ivy all about where they were headed to. "I never knew how queasy I would feel on a train," Carrie said, sipping some water. Tendrils of her hair were stuck to her forehead, and she flicked open her fan, trying to cool herself. "My ma said she could barely hold anything down when they came over from Wales on the ship. Looks like I suffer the same affliction," she added. Ivy passed her a handkerchief. "See if this helps. It's infused with lavender water, and have one of my mint humbugs. I found they helped me with feeling sick when I was first pregnant." "Does the man you're meeting know that you're in the family way?" Ivy had looked weary as the weather grew hotter, and when she stood up, Carrie noticed she could just see the swell of the baby under her gown. "Not in so many words, but he didn't specify in his letters that he would be against it. In fact, he said he would like children as long as I could still help out cleaning the guest rooms above the saloon. I hope he won't take advantage of you. It's difficult working when you've got a newborn." Ivy grinned and looked pointedly at Carrie's waistline. "How much longer do you think it will be until your baby arrives?" "What?" Carrie's mouth gaped open. "I'm not expecting," she said hastily. "It's just the motion of this train that's making me feel unwell. The journey seems to be going on forever. Are you sure about that? Ivy continued. The way you described how you feel was just like I felt before I found out I was having a baby. Carrie darted a glance at Davy, relieved to see that he was oblivious to the conversation, still poring over his book. No, it must be the train. I never felt tired or sick at all when I was expecting Davy, not like some poor women do. She closed her eyes and leaned her head back against the hard wooden seat, adjusting her shawl slightly to provide some comfort. And her thoughts drifted back to the week before Morgan's accident, when he had come home early several evenings and insisted that Carrie should come to bed rather than sewing late into the night. And thinking about it, her usual bodily rhythms had been different lately, but she had put it down to the stress of losing Morgan. Is it possible? Might I be carrying Morgan's baby? The thought sent her mind spinning with bittersweet joy, laced with a sudden rush of fear. What if it was true and she was pregnant? It was everything she had ever wished for. But Melvin Tate had only agreed to her coming to Rocky Ranch with Davy, not to support a second child that wasn't his own. She sighed and rested her hand gently on her stomach. Dear Lord, if I am with child, please keep it safe. Please give my body the strength and good health to keep this innocent baby healthy until it's born. By your bounteous grace. The prayer gave her comfort, and she felt tears pricking behind her eyes at the tragic realization that Morgan would never know he had become a father again after all. Are you all right, Ma? Why are you crying? Davy's words made Carrie open her eyes again, and she saw Ivy looking at her with concern. I was just remembering your pa, Davy, that's all. She glanced down at her stomach and caught Ivy's eye. I'm feeling a little unwell from the journey, and it makes me feel sad that there are certain things that Morgan will never know, she added. Ivy reached across and gave her hand a squeeze. Was I right? She asked. Carrie hesitated and then nodded. I think it's just possible, yes. Ivy beamed with a sudden smile. We'll be okay, Cassie. You and me both. We have to be strong for our children, don't we? Carrie nodded again, grateful that her new friend had understood without her having to explain. You're right, Ivy. And a bit like you, I think I'll wait a while until I tell Mr. Tate, give him a chance to get to know us first before springing any surprises on him. The two women shared a smile of understanding. New beginnings in more ways than one, Ivy said with a chuckle. And this time tomorrow, we'll be arriving at Blossom Creek. It's so exciting I can hardly sit still. Chapter 6. Blossom Creek, Montana. Look, Ma. Look at the mountains. Do you think that's where Mr. Tate will be taking us? Davy perched on the edge of the hard wooden seat, pointing rapturously toward the sweeping mountain range that stretched away as far as the eye could see. We'll be arriving at Blossom Creek very shortly, the conductor said with a nod as he strolled through their carriage. It's a bit different from what you're used to, huh? He winked at Davy. It's even better than I imagined, Davy breathed. His eyes were round with wonder. Look at all the cattle roaming in the pastures, and the flowers, Ma, and look how blue the sky is. Carrie felt her heart lift with happiness as she looked out of the window with him. Between the white clouds streaming past them from the locomotive engine, she had to agree. The landscape looked like an explosion of color. The green meadows at the foot of the mountains were lush, and she realized just how smog-bound Waterbury had been when she saw how far she could see in the clear country air. I think this will be just what we need, Carrie murmured to herself. How often do you think you'll come into town? Ivy asked as she shook out her shawl and draped it over her shoulders. Luke runs the corner saloon, and he told me it's not far from the mercantile store. Will you look me up when you come in for supplies? She suddenly looked anxious at the thought of losing her only friend as soon as they arrived at their destination. Melvin didn't say, but I'm sure we'd have to come in fairly regularly, even if it's just to attend church. Maybe there's a store that sells coffee where we could meet up. I'm not sure if Melvin would approve of me going to a saloon. Answering Ivy's question made Carrie realize just how little she knew about the man she was about to meet, and she felt a ripple of trepidation. My neighbor told me folks are friendly in these frontier towns. I guess there are so many people trying to make a new life. They have to make friends and do their best to settle in quickly. Carrie nodded, thinking back to the easy familiarity of Waterbury. Having lived there for so long, she'd known all the old families she'd grown up with, plus their histories. Out west, it seemed as though people were constantly coming and going. You could fabricate a story about yourself, and nobody would be any the wiser. She put the thought from her mind as quickly as it occurred to her. Melvin Tate was a rancher with connections. He had no secrets to hide. She could only hope that if her suspected new pregnancy did give her a much-longed-for baby, he would grow to love both her children as his own one day. Before long, the air reverberated with the sound of the squealing brakes on the locomotive, and the view from their window started to change as they reached Blossom Creek. Unlike some of the one-horse dusty outposts they had stopped at along their way, this town looked well established. The clapboard houses were laid out in an orderly fashion around a crisscrossed web of tree-lined streets, and she could see small factories and warehouses at the edge of town. It was much bigger than she had imagined, and the wagons she could see bowling along the streets showed that it was a thriving frontier town. Ivy quickly gathered up her belongings, crammed them into the top of her carpet bag, and touched her locket again, as though it might give her good luck. "Shall we agree to try and meet up on the first Sunday of next month?" Carrie was feeling equally nervous now that they had arrived and wanted to make sure that she and Ivy would stay friends. "Oh yes, that's a great idea." Ivy stood up and stretched, draping her shawl loosely to cover the slight swell of her stomach under her dress. "This is it, then. The start of our new lives." She hugged Carrie and then Davy. "Look after each other, won't you? And don't forget about me." Davy hoisted one of their bags over his shoulder. "Let me carry something for you, Miss Jordan. I'm stronger than I look." He picked up one of Ivy's 2 bags, staggering slightly, and grinned. "I've got to build up my muscles if I want to work on the ranch." A few moments later, they found themselves being carried along in the throng of people who had disembarked from the train. A surprising number were single women. "Looks like we're not the only mail-order brides," Carrie remarked, sharing an amused smile with Ivy. "It's time for us to say goodbye for now." Ivy hugged Carrie again. "Luke told me he's got bright red hair from his Irish ancestry and that he'd be waiting at the end of the platform. I reckon that's him over there." She blushed as she nodded toward a tall man who was walking toward them with a broad smile. "Miss Jordan? Ivy?" He looked between the 2 women and doffed his hat. "I'm Luke O'Donnell. Pleased to make your acquaintance." He took Ivy's bag from her and offered his elbow for her to tuck her hand into. "I've got the pastor booked to marry us this afternoon, if that's all right." Ivy blushed a deeper pink. Yes, of course, Luke." She twisted to look at Carrie and Davy again. "Before we leave, let me introduce you to my new friends, Carrie and Davy. Carrie's like me, meeting a gentleman to wed. You won't mind us meeting up when she comes into town, will you?" Luke chuckled. "Of course not, darlin'," he said in his lilting Irish accent. "As long as the work at the saloon is done. Speaking of which, I left my brother in charge of the bar while we get married, so we'd better not take too long. He's just as likely to drink the whiskey himself as to sell it and help me make an honest living." He threw back his head and roared with laughter at his own joke with a shake of his head. "You're going to love it here, Ivy. I knew you were right for me as soon as you wrote back to my advertisement." Ivy smiled, and for the first time in days, the worry in her eyes melted away, which Carrie was delighted to see. It looked like Luke's outgoing nature would soon help her settle into her new role at the corner saloon in no time. "The first Sunday of next month, then?" Carrie called. She waved as Luke swept Ivy through the gate, feeling a sudden pang of loss as they disappeared from her view. "Is Mr. Tate going to meet us here, Ma?" Davy looked up and down the platform, wondering why nobody was hurrying toward them the way Luke had. "That's what he said, but maybe he's running late. We have to remember that Rocky Ranch is out of town. It's not like Mr. O'Donnell, who can walk to the station. Perhaps he's been held up with a problem." Carrie tried to make her voice sound positive, but as the last few people drifted away, she couldn't help feeling a sense of misgiving. What if he's changed his mind? Why isn't he here, like he said he would be. As the worrying thoughts gathered in her mind, she opened her reticule and looked at the last few coins left in the bottom. She didn't have enough money to travel back east. Suddenly, the sound of running feet caught her attention, and a burly man burst through the door of the ticket office, skidding to a halt when he saw her. "Are you Mrs. Jones?" He strode toward them, lifting his hat to wipe the sweat from his brow. Carrie watched him approaching, unable to help the rush of emotions that washed through her as she formed her first opinion of the man. She was startled that he wasn't at all what she had expected. Melvin Tate had given the impression that he was tall and dark, but the man getting closer was thickset with broad shoulders, not much taller than her, and he had a shock of straw-colored hair and the brightest blue eyes she had ever seen. "Got held up, sorry." The man held up his grimy, calloused hands and examined them with a roll of his eyes before giving Carrie a tentative smile. "One of the young stock was stuck in a gully, so I had to stop and pull it out, or else its mother would have probably tried to scramble down after the poor little thing. Can we check that it's all right on the way home, Mr. Tate?" Davy stared up at the man with open admiration, while Carrie still hadn't found her voice. "Mr. Tate? Oh no, that ain't me." The man spat on his hand and wiped it on the side of his trousers before extending it again. This time, Carrie came to her senses and shook it. His grip was firm, and he looked her directly in the eye with an expression she couldn't quite read. Was it surprise or curiosity? Either way, his frank, blue-eyed gaze made her heart beat faster in a way she wasn't expecting. "So, who are you?" Carrie peered over his shoulder, wondering if there was some sort of mix-up. "We're waiting for Mr. Melvin Tate." "Oh, sorry, I'm forgetting my manners." The man chuckled and grabbed her carpetbag, swinging it over his shoulder. "I get so in my head thinking about the jobs I have to do on the ranch. I don't speak to many folks." He laughed again. "I'm Jesse Hudson, one of the ranch hands at Rocky Ranch. Mr. Tate sent me to collect you from the train." "Oh, I see." Carrie felt equally relieved that they hadn't been abandoned and slightly disappointed that Melvin hadn't bothered to come himself. After Luke O'Donnell's effusive welcome for Ivy and building up the moment of meeting Melvin in her own mind for the last few days, this seemed lackluster by comparison. Melvin's a busy man, is all. He's got a ranch to run, for goodness sake. She had a stern word with herself in her head and pushed her disappointment to one side, determined not to think the worst. "Is everything all right here, folks?" Wilbur Hennessy, the station master, strolled toward them. "I haven't seen you in town for a while, Jesse. How's life out at the ranch?" "Well, you know what it's like, Wilbur. Always something to do, and Melvin likes to keep me busy. I'm here to take Mrs. Jones and her boy back with me." Carrie noticed that Mr. Hennessy seemed slightly puzzled. "I've traveled from Waterbury on the East Coast with my son, Davy. I'm to be Mr. Tate's wife." She decided to be bold and tell them more. Judging by the number of women who had arrived today, it seemed there was no stigma to this way of meeting men in these parts. "I replied to a matrimonial agency advertisement. Mr. Tate was looking for a bride." She lifted her chin slightly, deciding not to be embarrassed about her situation. "Oh, a new wife, huh?" Mr. Hennessy nodded and darted a glance at Jesse Hudson, who shrugged slightly. "Well, funnily enough, that's how I met my wife, Rebecca." He gave Carrie a warm smile. "I hope you'll be very happy in Blossom Creek, and perhaps we'll see you about town, if Melvin comes in, that is." "Oh, I do hope so," Carrie replied. "I don't know anyone apart from Ivy, who I met on the train, and Mr. Hudson now, of course. I hope folks are friendly. I'd like to meet your wife if the opportunity arises, Mr. Hennessy. She might have some ideas to help me settle in." Wilbur nodded. "I'll mention it to her, ma'am. I know she said she was grateful to meet with some of the other wives when she first arrived, and I'm sure she'd like to meet you and your boy." He smiled to include Davy. "All ready for life on a ranch, son? You won't get anyone better than Jesse to show you the ropes." "I can't wait. I've never ridden a horse, but Ma says I'm a quick learner." Davy stood a little taller and squared his shoulders, eager to look the part. "I've been saying to Ma for ages that I'd like to be a cowboy, and now my dream is coming true. It's just a shame Pa won't see me." His words trailed off, and he looked suddenly crestfallen. "His pa passed away from an accident," Carrie said quietly. I'll help you learn to ride, Davy, Jesse said quickly. He rested his hand on Davy's shoulder for a moment. I've got a lovely little mountain horse called Suki. She'll be perfect for both of you to learn on. Davy's eyes shone. Really, Mr. Hudson? You'll teach me? He jiggled up and down with excitement. And you too, Ma, he added with a grin. We'll be able to go out with Mr. Tate and round up the cattle like real cowboys. Jesse chuckled. Melvin mostly leaves that kind of work to me, Davy. But as soon as you're good enough to join us, I'll bring you along. And you too, ma'am, if that's what you'd like. His blue eyes crinkled as he smiled at Carrie, then picked up the remaining bag. We'd better get going. You'll be tired from the journey, I expect, and ready for a good night's sleep. The wagon's out the front. He strode off ahead of them, and Carrie linked arms with Davy, hurrying after him. Are you excited, Davy? She whispered. It's been a hard few months for you, but I think we've done the right thing. Pa would have been very proud of you. She looked down at her son's innocent brown eyes and felt her heart melt with love as she saw the traces of Morgan in his features. So far, they had experienced nothing but kindness since arriving in Blossom Creek, and she knew that Morgan had been right when he'd said she shouldn't stay stuck in the past. They had had a good life together, but now it was time for a fresh start. Chapter 7. As the wagon gathered pace along the dusty road leading out of town, Carrie enjoyed the sense of peace that washed over her. She felt grimy from the long days and confined heat of their train carriage, but the warm summer breeze that rippled across the wagon soon revived her, and she gazed around at the view. It's quite something, isn't it? Jesse followed her gaze. He lifted one hand from the reins and pointed. We're headed that way. The ranch is at the foot of the mountains, up a track just yonder. It looks so beautiful, Mr. Hudson. Where we used to live, all we could see was factories belching out dirty smoke that used to hang in the air unless it was windy. Call me Jesse, please, ma'am. I ain't one for formalities. Carrie smiled. Well, in that case, you must call me Carrie. I mean, as long as Mr. Tate allows it. A glitter of water caught her eye, and she shaded her eyes to look at it better. That's the river. It flows right through the ranch from the mountains. Jesse glanced at Davy to see if he had any questions. There are quite a few streams all along these parts. That's why the stock do so well. If I ever get my own place, I'd be looking for a plot of land with a stream, that's for sure, he added quietly to himself. Is that what you hope to do? How long have you worked for Mr. Tate? Carrie bit her lip and gave a wry smile. Sorry, you might not want me to ask so many questions. My ma always used to tell me I was too inquisitive for my own good. I don't mind. It's kind of nice to talk about it with someone, to be honest. Jesse paused for a moment to consider his words. I've worked for Mr. Tate for almost 5 years. I came from Texas when my parents died, drifted for a bit, and wound up doing the cattle drive for Mr. Tate. And then I guess I just forgot to move on, he added. It was always my dream to have my own ranch. Maybe it will happen. Maybe not. Carrie tucked a lock of her brown hair that had escaped in the breeze back under her bonnet. Would you like to have one around here, or would you move away? The question popped out of her mouth before she realized, and she laughed again, hoping he wouldn't think she was being too nosy. I like it around here, Jesse replied. He pointed again to a spot further along the edge of the mountains. Just about there would be my perfect place, he added. The land isn't quite as fertile as Rocky Ranches, but I reckon I could make something of it. I'm not afraid of hard work to carve out a good life. He stopped suddenly, as though he'd said too much. Don't worry, I won't say anything to Mr. Tate, Carrie said hastily. Besides, it's good to have a dream of your own, something to work toward for you and your wife. Jesse clicked his tongue and pulled the reins gently to guide the horse up a rutted track. I appreciate you saying you won't mention it to Mr. Tate, he said, giving her a grin that made Carrie's breath catch slightly. He'd probably rather I stay working at Rocky Ranch. I don't have a wife to consider, so that's a bonus, I guess. A lot of women wouldn't want the hard work of setting up a ranch from nothing. What about you? Do you have a dream of your own? He added. Before she could reply, Davy suddenly stood up, grabbing Carrie's shoulder and pointing. Look, Ma, I can see the ranch house. He sat back down again heavily as the wagon lurched and turned to Jesse. Are those Mr. Tate's cattle? They sure are, Davy. We've bred them up slowly, and now they fetch some of the best prices in the district. I'll teach you what we look for in a good animal if you want to learn. Davy nodded happily. Yes, please. I've got a book that I've brought with me, and there's a bit about cattle in there, but I want to know everything. Jessie caught Carrie's eye over Davy's head, and they shared a smile. I ain't one for book learning. Nothing beats working with the animals, Davy. That's the best way to understand them. I can't wait, Davy said with a happy sigh. And Ma said that Mr. Tate will teach me lots as well. I'd much rather work with the animals than go to school. Uh-huh. Well, if you find Mr. Tate is too busy to help you learn about the ranch, just come and find me. Carrie wondered why Jessie's voice sounded doubtful, but before she could think about it anymore, the homestead came into view. The main cabin was fronted by a long veranda, and smoke drifted up from its chimney, filling the air with the scent of wood smoke. Away to the side, there was a cluster of barns and fenced stockyards and what looked to be several smaller cabins beyond. That's mine, Davy. You're welcome to come over any time. Jessie pointed to one of the small cabins. Keenan lives in the other one, but he's away at the moment because his father's not well. Carrie suddenly felt a surge of nerves grip her as she tried to take everything in. They had arrived, and there was no turning back now, she thought. The ranch looked well cared for, and there was a line of washing in the bountiful vegetable garden to the side of the cabin. As Jessie pulled the wagon to a halt, the front door creaked open, and a large dog bounded down the steps, barking loudly. Hush now, Duke. What sort of welcome is that? A petite woman with gray hair that was braided and wrapped around her head like a crown came slowly down the steps after the dog, which had stopped barking instantly at her command. You must be the new girl? The old woman looked up at Carrie quizzically. Am I right, Jessie? I got the right day, did I? Her wrinkled face broke into a warm smile when she caught sight of Davy. A little boy, too? Melvin didn't mention that, or maybe he did. My memory isn't what it was. She sighed with frustration. You're absolutely correct, Mrs. Tate, and I reckon there's not much wrong with your memory. You still run rings around us men. Jessie's voice was full of affection as he smiled down at her. Oh, good. It's so nice to meet you both. I'm Melvin's mother, Sarah. She looked vaguely over her shoulder. I thought Melvin would have been here. I'm sure he won't be long. Jessie helped Carrie get down from the wagon, and Davy jumped down next to her. Good day to you, Mrs. Tate. We're very pleased to meet you. I'm Carrie Jones, and this is my son, Davy. Carrie bobbed the older woman a small curtsy and nudged Davy, who reached out and shook her hand enthusiastically. Oh, do call me Sarah, dear, she replied, smiling again. Her dark eyes twinkled with humor. Melvin likes to keep things formal, but I'm old enough to be done with all that nonsense. We have to get along out here, don't we, Jessie? Just like one big happy family. Yes, ma'am. I'm going to give the horse a drink and unhitch the wagon. I'll see you around, Davy. Jessie lifted his hat and led the horse away. Come on inside, then. I've got your room ready, and I reckon you'd appreciate a nice bath. Don't mind Duke. His bark is worse than his bite. The dog sniffed Davy's shoes and wagged his tail, panting happily as Davy stroked his head. He can probably smell Bella on my clothes, Ma. Davy's face fell momentarily. Madeline had offered to take Bella on for them before they left. Even though the thought of leaving their beloved dog behind had brought tears to her eyes, Carrie had reluctantly agreed with Madeline that it was probably best not to bring Bella to the ranch with them, as she had never been around cattle and horses. He's taken a shine to you, Sarah said. She walked slowly back up the steps, using the wooden rail to help herself. This arthritis is the bane of my life, she muttered. I used to be a fine horsewoman, and now I can scarcely get around the house. Oh well, the Lord has blessed me with good health for nearly 70 years. I can't complain. Just as Carrie was stepping over the threshold, the drum of hooves grew louder, and she paused. Her heart beat faster as a man on a horse suddenly appeared from around the side of the barn and vaulted off in front of them. Howdy. Time got away on me. I see you've already met my mother? The man hitched the horse to a wooden rail and strode up the steps. His dark features were finer than Carrie had expected. and his pale gray eyes darted between Davy and her, giving nothing of his feelings away. "I'm Melvin Tate. Welcome to Rocky Ranch." "I was just taking Lila inside, although I'm sure she remembers the way," Sarah said, beckoning them in. "It's Carrie, Ma. Remember? Carrie and Davy, not Lila." Melvin frowned slightly at the look of confusion on his mother's face. "She gets a bit forgetful, but don't worry about it," he added to Carrie with a shrug. "Now, why don't you tell me about your journey?" He ushered Carrie ahead of him, and she wondered for a brief moment why Sarah had seemed so surprised when Melvin had corrected her. "So you lived in Waterbury on the East Coast?" Sarah's hand shook slightly as she poured the coffee out, making some of it slop over the edge of the cup. "Why don't you let me take care of that?" Carrie said quickly. "I want to make myself useful about the place. That's if you don't mind, of course." Her tone was respectful as she tried to judge whether Sarah would be offended by her offer or not. She didn't want the matriarch of the family to think she was taking over, but equally, she could tell that even though Sarah was wiry, she wasn't strong. Her fingers were knotted and swollen with arthritis, and she had winced slightly as she picked up the coffee pot. Sarah nodded her agreement and sat down. She watched Carrie pour the coffee out and tilted her head to one side like an inquisitive bird. "I've never been further than Blossom Creek these last 40 years or more. It's changed a lot in that time, but I wouldn't want to be anywhere else." "It certainly looked very charming from what we saw of it," Carrie agreed. "And you're here to marry my Melvin?" Sarah blinked and looked at her son. "Did you tell me that, Melvin? Or are you married already, Mrs. Jones?" She peered at Davy and blinked again. Carrie coughed slightly to cover her discomfort. She had assumed that Melvin's mother would know exactly what the plan was, but her thoughts seemed to be like clouds scudding across the sun. Clear one moment, then confused and muddled the next. "Remember, I told you that Carrie was widowed, and we have been corresponding, Ma. And yes, I'll be asking the pastor to marry us in a few weeks. We decided it would be better for Carrie to get accustomed to life on the ranch first." "Of course, it's all coming back to me now." Sarah gave Carrie a beaming smile before turning to Davy. "So, remind me who you are?" Davy darted a look at his mother, not sure what to say. "Davy is my son, Mrs. Tate. Sorry, Sarah. Like Melvin said, I'm a widow. He's a very well-behaved boy, and he'll fit right in, I promise." "I won't be any bother," Davy added hastily, taking a careful sip of his water. He turned to Melvin, adding, "I'm going to learn as much as I can and help you out with everything you want." "Pa?" His words trailed off, and he looked at Carrie with confusion, not knowing what to call Melvin. "I don't hold with that sort of familiarity," Melvin interjected. His expression had darkened slightly, and he looked uncomfortable, standing up quickly. "I think it's best the boy calls me Mr. Tate, don't you?" He gave Carrie a curt nod. "I need to go into town for some business. Ma will sort you out with some more appropriate clothes. What you're wearing won't last 5 minutes out on the ranch. It's far too fancy." "Of course, yes, I was going to suggest Davy should call you Mr. Tate, at least until we're married. And then maybe Pa?" "We'll see," Melvin said firmly. "I mean, I'm not his father, am I? I'll decide once we've gotten accustomed to the situation. We get up before daybreak, and you'll need to get the fire lit and start the chores in the house in good time. I don't know what time I'll be back tonight, so don't wait up." With that, he turned on his heel and strode back out of the house. Carrie sipped her coffee with her mind whirling. After the friendly demeanor of Jessie and even Mr. Hennessy at the station, Melvin seemed brusque by comparison. This wasn't the welcome she had imagined, not one little bit. "Don't judge him by our first meeting." He said in his letters that he's not one for extravagant gestures of affection. "It will be fine in a few days once we've settled in." The thoughts flitted through Carrie's mind as she tried to remind herself that meeting someone for the first time this way was bound to feel strange. She just hoped that Melvin would warm to them both soon, even though he had been at pains to point out that Davy wasn't his son. He had said in his advertisement that a widow with a child would be welcome, but his manner seemed to imply the opposite. Chapter 8. Carrie stretched and yawned, slipping out of bed as the first rays of the sun glanced over the mountaintops, painting the vast landscape in a wash of pale yellow. She stood at the window of the room she shared with Davy and looked out at the view with a happy sigh. It promised to be another hot day. There wasn't a cloud in the sky, and she could see the leaves on the trees dancing in the breeze. Fat cattle grazed in the nearby meadows, and birds swooped over the rippling grass, catching midges on the wing. She stroked her stomach absent-mindedly, then looked down at the faint swell under her nightgown with a worried frown. Sarah had given her a sturdy gray calico dress to wear on the ranch. It was much too big to be one of Sarah's own, yet it was clearly not new. Carrie had presumed it was from the second-hand clothes store in town and was grateful that it was slightly too large for her around her waist. The looseness of the dress and the serviceable apron she wore of the top of it most of the time concealed her pregnancy, but she knew it wouldn't for much longer. "Is it time to get up, Ma?" Davy sat up in bed and rubbed the sleep from his eyes. "I thought I would be too excited to sleep, but I guess I drifted off after all. We still have to make sure that Melvin agrees for you to help out Davy. Don't forget. He hasn't given me an answer yet because he went to town again before I had a chance to ask him." Carrie slipped out of her nightgown and pulled her dress over her head before quickly coiling her long brown hair into a bun. She secured it with a couple of hairpins and tied her apron around her waist while Davy wriggled into his own clothes. "But Jessie told me that branding the young stock is one of the best days of the year. Mr. Tate won't stop me helping out, will he?" Davy sounded excited and worried in equal measure. He tightened the leather belt holding up his trousers and jiggled from one foot to the other, eager to get on with the day. "He seems to have a lot on his mind at the moment, Davy. We don't want to pester him. I'll put in a good word for you and we'll see if that helps, all right? Now, why don't you go and feed Duke? And remember to wash your face under the pump," she added to his retreating back with a smile. Davy had blossomed since they had come to Rocky Ranch. There was no denying it. The cough, which he had never seemed able to shake off at their old home, had cleared up in the clear mountain air, and his pale cheeks now had a healthy glow with a dusting of freckles, much like her own. She even fancied that he had started to fill out more and grown a little taller. He was no longer the smallest boy in the tiny country school down the valley that he grumbled about attending. She could scarcely believe they had been here for 6 weeks already. The days had flown by, and their cramped rooms in the tenement building at Waterbury felt like a lifetime ago. Carrie paused to look in the fly-speckled mirror. There was still one issue that was causing her sleepless nights, though. "I'll have to tell him about the new baby today." Carrie sighed again, but this time it was not with happiness. Rather, it was filled with anxiety. Every morning for the last few weeks, she had told herself she should tell Melvin that she was expecting a second baby. But every day, her resolve had weakened, or it never seemed to be the right moment when they could talk quietly together. If anything, he seemed to be avoiding her, and she couldn't figure out why. Maybe this pregnancy won't end successfully, like my last 2. She thought back to the gut-wrenching disappointment of her 2 failed pregnancies since Davy had been born and prayed with all her heart that this time would be different. The problem was that Melvin seemed to find Davy's presence an inconvenience. Carrie had hoped that Davy's excitement about everything to do with ranch life would win Melvin over, but it was as if Melvin resented his questions. As the days passed, she had noticed that Davy had all but stopped asking Melvin about what was happening on the ranch. Instead, he scurried away to find Jessie. And Melvin gave the impression he was relieved not to have to trouble himself with getting to know Davy any better. If he's like that with Davy, who's as good as gold? What might he be like with a new baby? Carrie thought about the broken nights of feeding a newborn that lay ahead. Whichever way you looked at it, a new baby at the ranch would take some of her attention away from her own chores. And she couldn't help but wonder whether Melvin might end up regretting his proposal. She squared her shoulders and took a deep breath. This secrecy had gone on for long enough. The wedding was just a few short weeks away, and she decided that she would see if she could persuade Melvin to walk with her after dinner that night so they could talk away from Sarah and Davy. It was high time she should tell him she was expecting again. An hour later, Carrie buttered thick slices of bread and brought a pan of eggs to the table to serve breakfast for everyone. As it was going to be a busy day, Jesse had joined them too, and he smiled appreciatively when Carrie handed him a plate of food. "My favorite," he said, tucking in with gusto. "My favorite, too." Davy watched him out of the corner of his eye and followed suit, cutting up his bread in exactly the same way as Jesse. Carrie busied herself with pouring out the thick, dark coffee to cover her amusement. As she passed a cup of coffee to Melvin, she caught his eye. "Davy wondered if he might be able to help with the branding today," she said lightly. "He'll take care not to get in anyone's way, won't you, son?" She waited for Davy to nod, and then sat down and took a sip of her coffee. Melvin chewed for a few moments without replying. "It's no place to have the boy running around stirring up the cattle," he said flatly. "Time is money, and he'll just get under our feet." "I'm sure he'd be all right as long as he stays outside the yard, boss." Jesse shot Davy an encouraging smile. "He's coming along fine with his riding lessons, getting the measure of how to behave around animals." "And look at how Duke's taken to him, Melvin," Sarah chimed in. "Davy's a natural. You know Duke's choosy with who he befriends. I hardly see him anymore because he follows Davy everywhere," she added with a chuckle. As if to underline the point, Duke sidled up to the table and rested his chin on Davy's lap, gazing up at him as his tail swished back and forth in a wag. Melvin took a long drink of his coffee before putting the cup down forcefully. "Ain't I the person in charge around here anymore?" he snapped. Davy flushed. I'm sorry, Mr. Tate. I just want to learn what to do so I can be helpful." Melvin harumphed and stood up. "All right, I suppose you can keep the water troughs filled up and the fire stoked, but don't let me see you near the animals. That's man's work, not for a puny whip of a boy like you." He picked up his last piece of bread and turned on his heel. "Never thought I'd see the day I'd be humoring everyone this way on my own ranch," he muttered under his breath as he marched off. "I'm sorry. Lila, I really don't know what's gotten into him. You shouldn't have left." Sarah's hands fluttered to her chest, and her eyes clouded with confusion. "Jesse, you didn't tell me you had a son?" She looked at Davy and blinked. "We have to hurry up and finish breakfast. I've got to saddle up and ride into town in a minute." "No, Sarah, I think you've got a bit muddled." Carrie placed her hand gently over Sarah's and squeezed it. "I'm Carrie, remember, and Davy is my boy. Why don't you have a potter in the vegetable garden this morning? You don't need to ride into town. It's going to be a lovely day. Davy will help you collect the eggs." Sarah blinked again and suddenly smiled. "I don't think I slept very well last night," she said with a small shake of her head. "Sometimes I get confused with things that happened before. Silly me." "Not at all, Mrs. Tate," Jesse said hastily. "You're not silly, that's for sure. When you've got 70 years of memories, it's not surprising you might get a few of 'em muddled up now and again. You take it easy today, and I'll come and tell you all about the branding later on. I know how you like to hear about the animals." Carrie watched Sarah's eyes clear again as Jesse's words reassured her, and she felt grateful that he was so kind to her. Melvin seemed to find his mother's lapses of memory irritating, which only made her more flustered trying to get things straight in her mind. But Jesse's easy manner helped her stay calm instead. "Well, I'd better get going." Jesse wiped his mouth with the back of his hand and picked up his hat. "You come out in a few minutes, Davy, and I'll show you how we keep the fire banked up so it's hot enough for the branding irons." He nodded his thanks to Sarah and Carrie and strolled away. "Hold on a minute." Carrie hurried after Jesse, catching up with him on the veranda. "I forgot to ask if you would like me to bring some food across at lunchtime. Sarah said it takes all day to do the branding. That's if she's got it correct?" Jesse pushed his hat to the back of his head and smiled at Carrie. "We don't usually stop for much to eat, but it's hot and thirsty work. A cold drink would be much appreciated. In that case, I'll bring some lemonade over. And I cooked a nice ham hock yesterday. You'd have time for some ham and bread, I'm sure." Jesse nodded and darted Carrie a look of apology. "What Melvin said about Davy," he paused again, wanting to get the right words. "He's small for his age, but in my experience, Size doesn't make any difference to being good with animals. It's either something you've got or you don't. He jerked his head toward Davy, who was trotting across the yard with Duke by his side to run an errand for Sarah. Your boy is good with all the animals, Carrie. He'll be just fine working on the ranch once Melvin learns to trust him a bit more. It's taking longer than I thought for him to like Davy, Carrie murmured. I suppose it's because he's not Melvin's own son. It's hard for a man to take on another man's child. Not everyone would find it hard, Jessie said, watching Davy as he lugged a bucket of food through the vegetable garden for the chickens. Especially not a boy as likable as Davy. You should be very proud of him, Carrie. He'll grow up into a fine young man under your guidance. At least Sarah's taken to him, Carrie replied. Although why she keeps calling me Lila, I've no idea. I do worry about her being so forgetful. You don't know about Lila? Jessie's startled question cut across her words, and he looked at her with surprise all over his face. I just thought it was Sarah getting my name wrong is all. Lila was Melvin's first wife. She left a year ago and hasn't been seen since. Jessie shook his head slightly as he saw the blood drain from Carrie's face. Didn't Melvin tell you? He thrust his hands into his pockets and started down the steps. I'm sorry, Carrie. I just assumed you knew. Please don't say I told you. He must have his reasons. I expect he just hadn't gotten around to it. He was married? He already had a wife? Carrie whispered the words to herself, trying to get them to sink in. But why? Why would he have lied? I have to go, Carrie. Don't be upset. Jessie felt a stab of guilt as he watched the emotions chasing across Carrie's face. Disbelief, then confusion. Melvin told me she died. Maybe it's too painful for him to talk about just yet. Carrie watched Jessie walking away and found herself wishing for a moment that Melvin had his easy manner. She knew where she was with Jessie. He was like an open book, and she found him easy to talk to. By comparison, she often felt tongue-tied with Melvin. But now she realized that it was probably because he had kept this monumental secret from her. But that makes two of us. We've both been keeping secrets from each other. I'll talk to him later, she whispered to herself. The wedding is set for a couple of weeks. We have to clear the air. She crossed her hands protectively across her waist without thinking. We just need to get things out into the open, and then everything will be fine, she added quietly. Carrie watched Davy hurrying across the yard to join Jessie and smiled to herself as they fell into step together. It meant a lot to her that Jessie was pleased with Davy's progress. She only wished Melvin would show her son the same sort of affection. Chapter 9. It sounds like you've had a successful day, Melvin. Davy's very grateful you let him join in. Carrie cleared the dishes from the table and carried them to the sink. I am, Mr. Tate. Thank you so much. I've learned a lot today, and I promise I won't forget it. Jessie even let me have a go with the branding iron, just on a piece of wood, Davy added hastily. Melvin sat back and smiled expansively. I always feel better when the branding is done, he said. It's a big job getting all the animals in and sorting them out, but at least we don't have to worry about them being stolen now. I hate those cattle rustlers, thinking they can leech off another man's hard work. Carrie brought the coffee pot to the table and poured one for Melvin. He seemed to be in a good mood, and she decided that now was her chance. I wondered if we could take a walk after dinner, Melvin. The ranch is so beautiful, and there are a couple of things I'd like to talk to you about. Nothing bad, I hope? Melvin quipped. No, but it is a little personal. Carrie's gaze flicked toward Sarah and Davy, hoping he would understand that she would like to talk to him privately. Well, sure, that's fine, but not this evening, okay? I'm tired, and Marty Robinson has asked me to ride over to his ranch to help him out with something. Carrie tried not to feel hurt by the rebuff. Tomorrow, then, it's about the wedding, so it can't really wait much longer. Melvin had the grace to look apologetic. Tell you what, I won't stay at Marty's too long. We can talk when I get back. How about that? The rest of the evening passed pleasantly as Carrie and Sarah sat on the veranda watching the sunset. You must love it here so much, Carrie said. She threaded a needle and started working on the next part of the patchwork quilt she was making for Davy's bed. Sarah had told her how cold the winters got, and she was enjoying adding her own touch to the log cabin, even if it was in a very small way. Sarah rocked rhythmically on her chair and looked across the meadows. The evening sun had burnished everything in dusty golden hues. I do, dear. It's a good life. I mean, it's not always easy, but if a husband and wife are mindful of working toward the same ends, I reckon it's the sort of life most couples would feel blessed to have. She gave Carrie a shrewd look. You won't let Melvin down, will you? He's got a gruff demeanor sometimes, but underneath it all, he's a good man. And you're a devoted mother to him, Sarah, Carrie replied quickly. We'll do our very best to fit into your way of life. She paused and wondered whether she should mention what Jessie had told her. Being out here doesn't suit everyone, Sarah replied. Some women always think the grass is greener elsewhere. Anyone in particular? Carrie asked gently. She decided to risk asking her. Was Melvin married before? She added. Sarah rocked her chair a little faster and pursed her lips. I'm not sure if I can remember it right. She turned and smiled at Sarah. You came back, though, didn't you? That's all that matters. But make sure you don't leave again, won't you, dear? I don't think Melvin could take that. Carrie stifled a sigh and concentrated on her sewing. It seemed as though Sarah wanted to tell her something, but her forgetfulness meant she might not get it quite right, and Carrie knew it wouldn't be fair to press her on the matter. It was Melvin who needed to tell her, and hopefully he would return in good time for them to finally get everything out into the open just as soon as he got back from the neighbor's ranch. Shush, Duke. Don't wake everyone up. It's only me. As the dog whined, Carrie jerked awake in the chair by the fire. She had waited up for Melvin, but as the hours slipped by, she realized she must have fallen asleep. Are you all right, Melvin? What time is it? I decided to stay up so we could talk. Melvin stumbled slightly as he walked carefully across the darkened room. Can it wait? He muttered. Tomorrow will do, surely? He kicked his boots off and sat heavily in the chair opposite Carrie in a haze of stale whiskey fumes. Have you been drinking? The question burst out of Carrie's mouth before she could stop it, and she realized her tone was accusatory. Uh-huh, and what of it? Melvin fixed her with a resentful stare. I worked hard today. Can't a man meet with his friends for a drink now and again? Marty gave me a few drinks after we'd finished our business, that's all. Yes, of course. It's just, we were going to talk, remember? I feel like we haven't really gotten to know each other very well yet, and the wedding is in a few weeks. Carrie tried to keep her voice soft as she turned the lamp up to give them more light. I've got coffee on the stove. Let me get you one. She jumped up and hurried to pour him a cup, hoping it might sober him up. Melvin took the cup and blew on the coffee before gulping some down. So, what was it that can't wait? He said eventually. The pastor is booked. We don't need anything fancy, just the ceremony, and then we'll come straight back to the ranch. I reckon you've settled in all right, don't you? It's just, I wondered if there was anything we should know about each other before we get married. You know, things from the past. Carrie's voice shook slightly, and she hoped he wouldn't notice. I've got nothing to say, Melvin shot back quickly. What's the point of raking over the past anyway? People have let me down. He gave her a sullen stare before looking into the embers of the fire. All I can say is that women can be mighty unreliable in my experience. Saying one thing and doing another, it just ain't right. We're not all like that, Melvin, Carrie said gently. I don't know whether to ask this or not. Sarah has called me Lila several times, and I thought it was just her memory playing tricks on her. But maybe there's more to it? She let her words hang in the air, not wanting to get Jessie into trouble for telling her what he had. Melvin sighed deeply and picked at the seam on his trousers before shrugging. Lila was my first wife, he said flatly after the silence had stretched out uncomfortably between them. We were married for 2 years. She came from the East like you, but one day she received a letter saying her ma was sick. I gave her the money to travel back so she could take care of her. He laughed bitterly at the memory. I never saw Lila again. Eventually, I gave up waiting. Figured she had decided ranch life wasn't for her after all. Then one day, I received a letter from someone back east in Lila's hometown saying she had gotten sick and passed away. Carrie let out the breath she had been holding. I'm sorry to hear that, Melvin. But why did you say in your advertisement that you hadn't been married before? She asked hesitantly. Because, oh, I don't know. It's none of your business, he shouted, jumping up from his chair. We loved each other very much, or so I thought, but then she just left. We were going to have a family together, my own son to take over the ranch, and then it all came to nothing. His face was etched with such sudden grief that it made Carrie's heart squeeze with pity. I thought I was over her, but it's harder than I thought. Melvin's mouth twisted with pain. When I see your boy, all it does is remind me of what I never had with Lila. But where does that leave us? Carrie gasped. Her mind was in turmoil, and she gasped again as she felt the flutter of movement from the baby in her belly for the first time. There's something I need to tell you too, Melvin. Carrie gripped the arms of the chair tightly. She had to unburden herself no matter what. I don't want to hear it, Melvin cried. It's all been a terrible mistake. With that, he turned on his heel and stumbled back out. I need some fresh air. I need to clear my head. Carrie slumped back in the chair and blinked back her tears. Melvin had as good as said he could never love her and Davy. Lord, what should I do now? Please help Melvin open his heart to us. I can see he's not a bad person, but his heart still belongs to another. Please bless us with some way to help us come together as man and wife. Carrie whispered the prayer under her breath before creeping into bed. Just when she had felt a glimmer of hope that Melvin might be warming to them, this secret had ripped her dream of a new life to shreds. As the moonlight crept across the floor of her room, she pressed her hands to her belly and felt the tiny flutters of movement again. How can I tell him about the baby now? Tears rolled down her cheeks until, eventually, she fell into a fitful sleep just as the sky was starting to lighten in the east. The following morning, Carrie went about her chores as usual, trying to keep herself busy. Melvin ate his breakfast in silence before announcing that he would be spending the day in Blossom Creek to visit the bank and do some other business errands. As he went to leave, Carrie hurried after him across the yard. Melvin, wait up a minute. Her breath came in short gasps, and she realized it would soon be time to let out the seams of her dress. She wondered if Melvin had noticed, but his gaze was on the horse he was about to vault onto. We have to talk some more, Carrie said urgently. We can find a way through this, Melvin. I know it might take some time, but if we both want our marriage to succeed— Not now, Melvin said forcefully. The horse shifted uneasily at his curt tone, and he sighed. I feel like I've let you down, Carrie. You're an honorable woman, and I thought that would be enough, but my heart just feels stuck in the past. He turned his troubled gaze back to her and shook his head. I don't like talking about all this. Can you find it in you to give me a few more days to think about what's for the best? For the first time, Carrie sensed that Melvin was being honest with her about the way he felt, and she nodded. My own husband only died recently, Melvin. We both have a past, but it doesn't mean we can't have a future together. She took a deep breath and plowed on. Before you go, there is one more thing you need to know. Melvin threw his saddle onto the horse's back and tightened the leather straps under its belly. Tonight, Carrie, I promise we can talk some more tonight, but I need to go to the bank now. He swung himself into the saddle and kicked his heels, urging the horse into a fast lope down the track. Carrie stood watching him go until the cloud of dust from the horse's hooves had settled. A pair of doves billed and cooed in the apple tree nearby, and she smiled. The birds didn't make love complicated, she thought. Ma, I'm having a riding lesson with Jessie. Will you come and watch me? Carrie's thoughts were interrupted by Davy's cheerful shout. I'll come over just as soon as I've washed the dishes. It was a beautiful late summer day, and Carrie decided that, just for once, the rest of her chores could wait for a while. For all she knew, they might have to leave the ranch and return to Waterbury soon, so Davy deserved a bit of fun, and she did too. Remember what I said, keep your hands light on the reins. Suki doesn't need much guidance. Ride her around the barrels like I showed you. Jessie was leaning over the wooden rail, and he turned to Carrie with a grin when he realized she was approaching. You don't mind me watching, do you? Davy's been asking me to come and see how he's doing for days. Of course not. Here, climb up and sit on top of the railings with me. Jesse extended his hand and pulled her up the railings. His grip was strong, and Carrie felt her pulse quicken slightly at his touch. He's doing really well, considering he'd never been on a horse before. Carrie settled herself on the top rail, smoothing out her dress. She shaded her eyes to watch Davy bending Suki in tight figures of 8 around 2 barrels. He's so happy, she said. I'm very grateful to you, Jesse. You've really helped Davy to settle in. Jesse shrugged. It's no hardship. I enjoy his company. Yours too, he added quietly. Jesse kept his focus on Davy as he spoke, and Carrie gave him a sideways glance, wondering if there was more behind his words than he was letting on. His profile wasn't what you'd call traditionally handsome, but he had a rugged look about him that made her think you would feel safe. Her heart beat faster as she realized her thoughts had drifted toward imagining being embraced in his arms, and she felt herself blushing. He would miss you if we had to leave, she murmured. Leave? Why would you be leaving? Jesse's voice was suddenly sharp, full of concern. Don't you like it here? I do, Carrie said simply, but I don't think Melvin likes us being here. But what about the rest of us? Jesse bit back his words, knowing he had spoken out of turn. Sorry, it's none of my business, he added hastily. He fixed her with his blue-eyed gaze. Do you think Melvin will come round? Carrie didn't know what to say. Jesse had such a direct way of speaking that she felt her defenses weaken. I think he still loves Lila, even though he knows she's passed and he'll never have her back again. I always said I never wanted Davy to feel second best, but Melvin had hopes for having his own children. He hasn't really warmed to Davy, and I know my boy is finding that hard. Davy wants to like Melvin, but I don't think he can yet. And what about you? Jesse asked softly. Suddenly, Carrie couldn't bear the pain a moment longer. She scrambled down from the railings and started to run across the yard, desperate to return to the silence of her room. But as she ran, she caught her foot in a clump of grass and sprawled onto the dirt, winding herself and banging her head on the ground. Carrie? Carrie, are you all right? Jesse's voice came from far away, and Carrie's eyes fluttered open. She looked up, expecting to see the sky, but a shadow loomed over her. Have you hurt yourself? You went down pretty hard. Jesse's blue eyes looked down at her, full of worry. I'll be fine. It's nothing. Carrie closed her eyes for a moment. She felt his strong hands helping her to sit up. It's just the heat. I wasn't looking where I was going. Let me help you. Lean on me, and I'll take you to the shade. Carrie felt the comforting strength of Jesse's muscular arms supporting her as she struggled to her feet, and she leaned against his chest for a moment, trying to catch her breath. Thank you, Jesse. As soon as she felt stronger, she stepped backward. Being so close to him was making it hard for her to think. His musky scent, the warmth of his bright blue eyes, the sensation of feeling comforted as though he really cared for her. Stop. It's Melvin you're here to marry. The thought pulsed through Carrie's mind, making her jump. She gave him a shaky smile and pushed the hair from her eyes. I'm clumsy today. I don't know what's come over me. Well, being pregnant can do that, I guess. Jesse held her shocked gaze and then smiled gently. Carrie, I work with animals every day. I know when one of the cows is expecting a calf, they walk differently. He chuckled. Not that I'm saying you walk like the cows, of course. I mean, what I'm trying to say is... Carrie's ripple of laughter cut him short. You've got a way with words, Jesse. I'll give you that. She laughed again, but then her smile faded. I've been trying to find a way to tell Melvin for weeks, but I'm not brave enough. I honestly didn't realize I was expecting until I was on my way here, and then it was too late to turn back. Melvin said he wouldn't mind a widow with a child in his advertisement. But from the way he's been with Davy, well, I'm worried this will be the final straw for him, and he'll send us packing. Just let him try, Jesse said, pacing back and forth. He can't abandon you in your time of need, Carrie. It wouldn't be right. If it was me, I would. He bit his lip, not finishing what he had started to say. I'll tell him tonight, Carrie said, knowing it had to be done. If Jesse had noticed she was pregnant, then maybe Melvin already suspected it too. But now I need to go and do my chores. Thank you again for being a good friend to us, Jesse. I don't know how we would have settled in here without you. I just wish Melvin could be more welcoming like you've been." She looked up into his blue eyes and, for a split second, wondered what it would be like to feel his stubble against her face as he kissed her before pushing the thought from her mind. "Why is it Jesse I'm thinking of? He's just being friendly." Carrie felt more confused than ever at the turmoil of emotions that engulfed her. As Carrie hurried back to the cabin, Jesse watched her and kicked the toe of his boot in the dust. The way her hair curled around her face and the depths of her brown eyes, it was all he could see when he closed his eyes. He was falling for her, but she was engaged to be married to another man. "Maybe it's time for me to move on," Jesse muttered, finally speaking aloud the words that had been swirling around his head for the last few weeks. It was one thing to fall for a woman he couldn't have, but another to have to endure the pain of seeing her every day happily married to his boss. If it weren't for how fond he had grown of Davy, he would have already left, he realized, finally being honest with himself. Chapter 10. "Come on then, let's walk to the meadow and have a talk." Melvin offered Carrie his arm, and she tucked her hand into the crook of his elbow. "Look after Ma, please, Davy. We won't be long." Davy nodded. "Sure will, Mr. Tate. You can rely on me." He carried a pot of tea to the table and poured Sarah a cup, making Carrie smile. "He's a good boy," Melvin said gruffly as they strolled across the yard between the barns. "I always wanted a son to take on the ranch after me. When you've got kin, it makes all the hard work worthwhile. You've only seen the good side of the ranch so far," he added. "Wait until we're in the depths of winter and the snow comes up to our knees." Carrie looked out across the rippling meadows where the cattle were grazing and tried to imagine the snow swirling from gray clouds, blanketing everything, but it was hard to picture. "I understand what you're saying about having your own son, Melvin. I think it's normal for a man to hope for such a thing." She smiled, remembering the almost paternal pride in Jesse's voice earlier when he had explained how Davy was such a quick learner when it came to the animals. He would make a good father one day, she realized. Her thoughts flitted to what kind of woman Jesse might end up marrying until Melvin's question pulled her from her thoughts. "So, what was it you wanted to tell me?" Melvin turned to face her, giving her his full attention. "There's no easy way to say this," Carrie started. Her heart started to thud with nerves, so she took a steadying breath. "I'm expecting another baby, Melvin. I promise I didn't mean to deceive you. I didn't even realize until I was almost in Blossom Creek." Melvin's mouth gaped open for a moment. Then he snapped it shut. "Are you sure? Realizing on the way out here seems mighty convenient. Why haven't you said anything until now?" he demanded. "I know, I should have." Carrie held up her hands, accepting his anger. "I told myself I would just wait a few days until we'd settled in, and then you seemed so disappointed with us. I could tell something was bothering you, but I didn't know what it was. The days slipped by, and I guess I just didn't have the courage to tell you." She hung her head for a moment, but then looked up again with a defiant glint in her eyes. "I lost 2 pregnancies after Davy was born. I don't regret being pregnant with this baby, Melvin. He or she is a blessing from the Lord, and I won't wish it was different." Melvin released her arm and walked away, leaning on the fence to gather his thoughts. "A better man than me would be happy for you, Carrie. I'd like to say it doesn't matter that the baby isn't mine, and Davy too, but I'm not ready for that quite yet." "So you want us to leave? Is that what you're saying?" "Yes. No, I don't know." Melvin shook his head to clear his mind and then shrugged. "No, I think you should stay. You've adapted well to the ranch, and I think with some time we'll learn to love each other, and I'll learn to love your children too. Who knows, we might have 1 or 2 of our own as well." He smiled, suddenly shy. "Are you sure this is what you want, Melvin?" Carrie didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "Yes, let's make a go of it." Melvin hurried over to her and took her in his arms. "We'll start again from now. No more secrets, all right?" Carrie nodded, lost for words, and Melvin pulled her closer, looking into her eyes. "I'll try harder, Carrie. You'll see." As they strolled back toward the cabin, Melvin chatted about the animals, talking with quiet pride about how his father had built the ranch from nothing. Carrie nodded and commented, but all she could think about was how she felt. Or rather, what she wasn't feeling. She kept waiting for her pulse to quicken the way it did when Jesse talked with her, or for the sense of comfort she had felt when Jesse had supported her in his strong arms that had made her yearn for the moment to last longer. But as Melvin took her hand, she felt nothing of the sort. His gaze was kind, but it didn't see into her soul the way Jesse's blue eyes did. She searched her mind to try and pinpoint what was wrong, telling herself that maybe it would feel different in the future. But for now, her overriding emotion was a feeling of relief that Davy would be able to stay at the ranch, and confusion that her heart seemed determined to make her think of Jesse instead of Melvin, the man she was marrying before the end of the month. Is that enough to base a marriage on? Convenience over love. Will Melvin ever really feel about me the way he felt about Lila? The thoughts skittered through Carrie's mind, but she didn't have an answer. Sit still, will you? Carrie smiled ruefully as she ran the comb through Davy's hair. It was a few days after she had told Melvin about the baby, and she had decided to cut Davy's hair ready for the wedding. As she carefully snipped his dark locks, she let her mind wander over the last few days. Melvin had been true to his word, showing a little more interest in Davy and answering his questions. But Carrie could tell that Davy didn't feel the same easy friendship that had grown between him and Jesse. And she still wasn't sure if Melvin was convinced they should get married. They had reached a friendly truce, talking politely about the ranch and the goings-on in Blossom Creek. But Carrie had a nagging sense of unease. Is he going ahead with the wedding out of duty or because he really likes me? No matter how much she busied herself with chores, the doubts never left her alone. That tickles, Ma. Davy giggled as she brushed the hair cuttings from his collar onto the veranda, where the breeze whisked them away. Look, we've got a visitor. Davy pointed to the puff of dust in the distance that heralded someone heading up the track to the ranch. Melvin didn't say we were expecting anyone. Maybe it's Marty Robinson coming to look at some cattle. As Carrie watched, she saw a wagon getting closer, and Melvin appeared in the doorway of the barn to see who it was. A gust of wind eddied through the yards, whipping the dust high up into the air in a swirling twister, blocking the wagon from their view. The sound of hoofbeats got closer, and then suddenly the air cleared, and the wagon was right in front of them. A blonde-haired woman clambered out and ran toward Melvin as fast as her feet could carry her. "I'm home, Melvin. I'm home, and I'm never leaving again." "Lila, is it really you? I thought you were dead, but God has brought you home." Melvin's cry of happiness was like a wave of icy cold water breaking over Carrie. She felt the blood draining from her head, and her legs started to tremble. She staggered down the steps of the veranda, then the ground rushed up to meet her as fainted clean away. Chapter 11. Where? Who? Carrie mumbled, trying to make sense of what was happening, but a throbbing pain pulsed through her temple as she moved her head. "She's coming round." A woman's voice reached Carrie as if from down a long tunnel. "Help me sit her up and give her something to drink." Carrie felt strong hands under her arms, gently supporting her. She fainted last week as well. It's all too much for her to take in, especially in her condition. The voice sounded like warm honey and somehow familiar. She searched in her mind, and an image of the crinkle of Jesse's smiling eyes floated into her thoughts, making her feel comforted. "Look, her breathing is better now." The woman's voice again, but not Sarah's. Carrie wondered who it could be, and her eyes fluttered open. "Oh, thank goodness, you gave us all a fright." The blonde-haired woman smiled down at Carrie. "Have a sip of lemonade. You need to get your energy up, what with being pregnant." Carrie gasped, and her eyes flew open properly. She twisted her head, seeing Jesse, Melvin, Sarah, Davy, and Lila all looking at her. "I'm sorry. I don't know what happened." She shuffled into a higher sitting position and winced as her head throbbed with pain again. "You fainted," Jesse said. "I was just walking by with Suki, and I couldn't get to you fast enough. You've had a nasty bang to your head." "Nothing a few days. Rest and some of my tonic won't cure," Sarah added quickly. "Mind you, I think we've all had a bit of a shock today." She glanced at Lila, who looked embarrassed. "Lila didn't die after all." Melvin gazed at his wife with his eyes full of wonder and raw love. "So I gather," Carrie said dryly. The memory of seeing Lila fly into Melvin's open arms and the look of incredulous delight on his face slowly fell back into place. "I'm sorry I've caused such an upset," Lila said. "I can explain everything." She looked genuinely repentant, and Carrie found herself feeling torn. Even in her befuddled state, it was clear to see that Melvin and Lila were deeply in love with each other. Now she realized why he had found it so hard to move on and love her and Davy instead. "I think Carrie needs to have at least a few hours resting in bed, and we can all talk tomorrow, don't you?" Sarah said crisply. She darted Carrie a look of pity. The poor woman came here in all good faith to marry Melvin, and now she and Davy will be left to fend for themselves. Lila flushed slightly. "I know, Melvin told me a little of Carrie's situation, and I'm sorry, I truly am. I've been writing regular letters to Melvin all this time, but I found out that the mailman never sent them. He bore my father a grudge from many years ago. Some sort of family feud. I only found out a few weeks ago, when Ma passed away, that none of my letters had been sent. And worse still, he had forged a letter saying I had died." Carrie frowned. "What a terrible thing for someone to do to you," she said quickly. "I hope he's been given some sort of punishment for it." "I reported him to the police," Lila nodded. "But I was more concerned about coming back to dear Melvin. As soon as I discovered the mailman's deception, I came on the first train out here. I was going to stay behind a few more weeks to take care of Mama's things after her passing. But this was more important." Her eyes clouded with worry as she looked at Melvin. "I couldn't understand why you'd stopped writing to me. I thought maybe you'd given up on me." "Never," Melvin cried. "My heart was broken. I thought you'd decided ranch life wasn't for you. Then I mourned you for many months when I got the letter saying you had died. And then Marty said it was time for me to stop wishing for something that could never be. He suggested I should place another advertisement." He looked between Carrie and Lila. "I never meant to hurt anyone, but it's all a terrible mess. Right? That's enough talking for now." Sarah nudged Jessie. "Help me put Carrie to bed, please. You're the only person I can get any sense out of today." Jessie scooped Carrie up in his arms as though she was as light as a feather. There was a strange expression in his eyes that Carrie tried to decipher. It seemed almost like relief. And he took a breath as though he wanted to say something, but as she winced with pain again, he merely held her tighter and followed Sarah through the house before laying her gently on top of the patchwork quilt on her bed. "I wish you'd stop giving me a fright," he murmured. "That's the second time this week. I need to keep a closer eye on you," he added with a wry smile. "Well, you won't have to worry about it for much longer. Davy and I will have to leave as soon as I'm well again." Carrie held his kind gaze for a moment, then turned her head away as she felt tears prick the back of her eyes. "It's clear that Melvin and Lila are meant to be together. I can't stand in their way," she added with a sigh. "Maybe there's another way. Time for you to get some rest." Sarah bustled into the room, interrupting Jessie. She closed the drapes and shooed Jessie through the door. "Don't worry, I'll make sure she stays in bed," she reassured him. "I know I can be a bit forgetful these days, but not when it really matters. You take care of Davy. All of this will be very upsetting for him, too." Jessie put his hat back on and nodded. "I'll come back later and check up on you," he called quietly to Carrie. Before leaving, he drew Sarah to one side. "I'm worried about the baby. I mean, for Carrie's sake. Are they both going to be all right?" Sarah gave him a shrewd look and then patted his arm. "Carrie's stronger than she believes. I've known for a while she was with child. Don't you worry, Jessie. I'll take good care of her. She deserves a happy family of her own after everything that's happened. Don't you think?" She watched the emotions in Jessie's eyes change from despair to something more positive, like clouds scudding across the sky. "I reckon so." Jessie nodded and hurried away to fetch Davy. "Let's feed the stock, and then you can help me groom the horses. I reckon it's time you learned to care for Suki as if she were your own horse, don't you?" Sarah stood in the doorway, watching the two of them filling a trough with oats, and a small smile played on her mouth. "Lila, shall we make dinner? Let's do Melvin's favorite stew, shall we? He refused to have it since you left. He said it reminded him too much of losing you, but by the Lord's grace, you're back with us again, where you belong." A week later, Carrie tilted her face toward the rising sun as it crept over the jagged ridge of the mountains, enjoying the kiss of its rays on her skin. It was the first day she had felt properly well again since fainting, and she had woken before dawn. The bruise on her temple was fading, and she felt a renewed sense of purpose. "I can't put it off any longer," she murmured, looking down at the bump beneath her dress. She chuckled as she felt a corresponding ripple of movement inside her belly. "You're a lively baby, that's for sure. I just hope you won't mind another long week of travel on the train." The sound of footsteps approaching made her spin round. She had hoped for a few peaceful moments to herself, to gather her thoughts and start saying farewell to Rocky Ranch. "I couldn't sleep." Jesse gave her an apologetic grin. "This is one of my favorite spots on the ranch," he added. "Mind if I join you?" Carrie nodded and moved slightly to make room for him at the fence where she was standing. The horses in the paddock snickered and flicked their ears on hearing Jesse's voice. "I'll miss this view. Melvin has given me the money to buy 2 train tickets for Davy and me to go back to Waterbury. Hopefully, my dressmaking customers will come back to me. I haven't been away that long." "I wondered if you might settle in Blossom Creek instead," Jesse said. He picked a handful of grass and held it out for Suki, stroking her soft, whiskery muzzle after she'd taken it daintily from his outstretched palm. "I thought about it, but I was worried that I might not find enough work to support us. Besides, when you care for someone, it's hard to see them settling down with someone else." Jesse nodded slowly. "You mean Melvin and Lila?" "Yes. Well, actually no, not exactly." Carrie could feel the heat from Jesse's body next to hers, and her heart skipped a beat. His solid presence made it hard for her to think straight and get her words out without stumbling over them. She glanced sideways at Jesse from under her lashes, wondering if he had noticed. "There's something I've been meaning to ask you for a while. I couldn't say anything before a while, but I reckon I've got nothing to lose, seeing as you're all set to leave. I mean, if I get it wrong or make a fool of myself, it won't matter, will it? Because you'll be the other side of the country, and I'll kick myself if I don't give it a shot at least. But you know, I'm not very good with words. I mean, unless Davy's with me, I usually only speak to the animals." Carrie put her hand on Jesse's arm and chuckled. "I think you'd better just ask me before you run out of breath." Jesse kicked a pebble with his boot and took a deep breath. "Remember I told you how I'd like to start my own ranch further along the valley?" He waited until Carrie nodded before continuing. "Well, a plot of land came up for sale. I've been to the bank and they told me they'll give me first refusal." "Oh, Jesse, that's wonderful. Your dream is coming true. I wish you every happiness." Jesse grinned. "I knew you'd understand." He fidgeted slightly, then took another deep breath before looking directly at Carrie. "The thing is, I didn't tell you about the rest of what my dream was. It's not just having my own ranch. It's about building a ranch with the woman I love by my side and sharing it with our children." Carrie glanced away. The intensity of his gaze was making her feel dizzy with desire, and she felt a crushing wave of regret as she imagined Jesse with another woman. "I hope you'll be very happy with her," she said quietly. She smiled up at him, determined not to spoil their friendship on their last day together. "Not her," Jesse said. He shook his head. "See, I knew I'd mess this up. What I'm trying to say, and not doing a very good job of it, is that you are the woman I love, Carrie. It's you and Davy and the baby who I want to have with me, building our new life together. Would you be my wife?" Carrie felt the blood roar in her ears and swayed slightly at the enormity of what Jesse was asking her. He sprang forward and swept her into his arms. "Oh, Jesse, yes, nothing would make me happier." Carrie gazed up into those bright blue eyes that she had dreamt about so many times and felt joy and love flood through her. "I've harbored feelings for you for weeks, but I didn't dare hope that you might feel the same way." Jesse bent his head and kissed her gently. "You had my heart from the moment you first sat next to me on our way out to Rocky Ranch. And then, every day since, I've found myself falling deeper and deeper in love with you, Carrie. I knew I had to leave Rocky Ranch. I couldn't have stayed here and seen you every day with Melvin. That's why I started looking for somewhere to go." Carrie rested her head against his chest, feeling his strong heartbeat against her, and then looked up at him again. "You don't mind that Davy and the baby aren't yours?" "No. I already think of Davy like a son," Jessie said forcefully. "It's been eating me up inside to think of never seeing you both again and him going back to live in a town with no animals to care for. He's a rancher through and through, and I want to take care of the three of you so we're a family, Carrie. If you'll let me, that is." "It's not just your dream anymore. It's our dream come true now, Jessie," Carrie whispered. "We'll work hard, side by side, and every day will be filled with love and blessings. No matter how tough it is, being together is what matters more than anything." She leaned back slightly, gazing into his eyes, and then sighed happily as Jessie gently rested his hand on her belly and kissed her again. "I love you, Jessie Hudson," she murmured. "And I love you too," Jessie replied, drinking in the heady feeling of passion and belonging that coursed between them. "May the Lord bless our love and our family, Carrie, and I give eternal thanks that he brought us together." The sun rose higher in the sky, and Suki snickered again as she spied Davy yawning on the veranda before running down toward them. "Ma, are you all right? Do you feel faint again?" he cried. Jessie and Carrie turned to face Davy, holding hands. "We've got some wonderful news for you, Davy," Carrie said quickly. "Jessie and I are to be married, and we're going to have our own little ranch just along the valley." "And that's not all," Jessie added. "Melvin has already told me he's giving us 10 good steers and a couple of breeding cows as a wedding present to get us started, and he's letting you take Suki, too." Jessie grinned at Carrie. "Sorry, I might have mentioned to Melvin that I was in love with you. He and Lila said they couldn't be happier." Davy skipped from one foot to the other with excitement. "My very own horse, and our very own ranch, Ma. I think this might be the best day of my life." He darted away to fetch a bucket of water for the horses before turning back, looking suddenly shy. "Can I call you Pa?" he called. "I certainly hope so, son," Jessie replied. He drew Carrie into another embrace and looked deeply into her warm brown eyes again. "I love you, Carrie. This is the happiest day of my life, too. Now let's go and tell the others our good news." The end. Thank you for listening to this free audiobook, and we hope you enjoyed it. Martha Gillcrest writes clean romance stories that sweep you away to when times were simpler, with plenty of love and adventure to entertain you. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to like it with a thumbs up and subscribe to this channel. That way, you will always know when a new audiobook has been added for your listening pleasure.